As a special thank you, I'd like to give a shout out to Momio is the best girl for giving me access to a new video editor when my last one completely crapped the bed and wouldn't render my video at all. This is part of the reason why this video took so long, so my apologies, and thank you, Momo. I mean, actually, she isn't the best girl, but you're allowed to be wrong in this country. There's no law saying that you have to be right. Just as a point. Thanks anyways. Hi, and welcome to another...
Oh my god!
Yes, that timestamp isn't an error. The script for this video alone was roughly a 35,000 word behemoth. The size of this video is why I didn't post one in May, and computer problems is why I didn't post one in June. You may want to get a snack. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Hello and welcome back. Today we're going to be discussing all about spirits in the world of Exalted, and we're going to be going fairly in-depth about them today. We're not only going to be discussing what religion means to spirits and people in Exalted, but also discuss the various spiritual realms that exist within the world within Exalted, before finally the various types of spirits themselves. Think of this as the everything you ever want to know about spirits but were afraid to ask video. So why are spirits important in Exalted? The game is called Exalted after all, not spirits. Spirits of all sorts fill an important niche in the world of Exalted. They not only serve to help flesh out the setting, but are important to know about. And this is because spirits are everywhere in the setting. No matter where you go, I'm willing to bet there's going to be some sort of spirit within the relative vicinity of your area. Whenever you're interacting with divine godly miracles, demonic pacts, or ancient ancestor ghosts for advice, each one of them involves a spirit, and each one of them has different things that makes them tick. I'll be discussing the mid-layer of complexity for spirits in the worlds they inhabit today. There are still loads to learn about them, but the information in today's video should be enough to get you by in your games without completely overloading you. I will also note the spirits discussed in this video today are varied as the amount of species that exist in our world. So if Exalted experts are watching this video and want to go, well actually, this specific spirit doesn't follow the trends you mentioned with the others, there will always be exceptions. But I feel comfortable knowing that at least 95% of the spirits in this group will work in this way that I describe. You may also note the inclusion of Fae in this episode. Strictly speaking, yes, Fae are not spirits, but I feel they operate a niche distinct yet similar enough and important enough to warrant their inclusion in this video. Plus, it's easier for me because I don't need to make an entirely different video talking about Fae. The breakdown of what we'll discuss today is first religion within the world of creation, how it works for both mortals and the things mortals give their praise to. Second, we'll be looking at the different spiritual realms within Exalted and how they work, as I believe each realm closely ties in within the nature of the spirits who come there. Lastly, we'll be looking at the spirits themselves, how the unique metaphysics work, and how they are different from each other, but at the same time, how each of them share common traits among each other. The game we're playing today is The Disappearance of Gensokyo, something I'd best describe as Diablo Light mixed with Touhou. It's a fun but very hard game. No, I mean the bosses are brutally difficult to the point where I cut out most of my deaths in this video. With the main protagonist of this game being Tenchi, a daughter of heaven, I felt it appropriate for this video. So strap yourselves in, grab your sugary, carbonated beverage, and nutritionally absent synthetic food of choice, because we're going in hot. Part 1. Religion within Creation. Now, I feel this is a very important section, in fact, fundamentally critical, of understanding how the realm of not only spirits works, but the very concept of the divine itself within the Exalted setting, in which the first steps in talking about the divine is what role the divine seeks to fill within society and how people within said organization pay tribute to the divine itself. And for clarity, by organization, I mean any group of entities, be it a town, a company, or a religion itself. Now, I would have covered the topic of religions back in my previous video. After all, saying that religion had a significant impact on not only past cultures, but even today, would be a gross understatement. But I felt it could be better addressed within a video entirely dedicated to spirits in general. So until I say otherwise, keep donning the mantle of your humble Bronze Age farmer, as understanding the place of religion in medieval or ancient societies is not only vital to understanding for Exalted, but nearly any other sort of classical fantasy world in general. Religion is a complicated thing to discuss not only in Exalted, but in real life as well. Each religion or faith has an enormous impact on not only an individual's life, but their entire society. From rich to poor, the beliefs that come from religion will shape the perspective of everyone who lives under it and also directly next to it. So, to get off on the proper foot, let us define religion as the way it would be understood within the context of this video. Religion, in this case, is a belief in some sort of higher deity or set of personal beliefs that instill their followers with a set of attitudes towards others and standard practices one should take within their daily and long-term lives. For our next example, let's focus on our world. Why do people practice such strange rituals in the name of religion? Why would you give up the ability to eat meat or waste your time doing what is mostly doing nothing but offering words of praise to some imaginary being? The answer to this, of course, is a comprehensive and multifaceted answer that people far more intelligent than I attempt to tackle. But for this video, we'll be focusing on some of the things I consider the most important. A few of the things religion does is that it builds a sense of community, it gives others a sense of purpose and place within the world, and it also provides a sense of morals and safety throughout the city itself. The first powerful aspect of religion is that it helps build a sense of community, both within your villages or quite possibly across a country depending on the scope of the faith in question. If you and another person practice the same religion, then you not only have an immediate sense of common ground you can establish, but also an expected understanding of principles to go along with them. In a world where the village next door to you can speak an entirely different language, such a thing is a vital tool of how people can get along with one another. Within your community, it takes on a different role of strengthening those bonds, saying that since each of you practice the same faith, you are sort of a brother and sister, someone you can depend on in times of need and hardship. Such bonds are not only merely reinforced by faith, but by action as well. Weekly or evening meets for prayer are group activities which serve not only to reinforce a belief in a faith, but also build closer bonds with those that exist within the community itself. Knowing that your next door neighbor comes with you to the same evening prayers you do every day helps reinforce your sense of camaraderie with him. Large religious festivals, such as the annual Fall Harvest Festival or Hearst Eve celebration, gives one a chance to relax and a chance to build or reinforce ties of friendship and love. Beyond any deep cultural, metaphysical, or historical significance such holidays have, they allow the people within said culture to reaffirm who and what they hold dear and serve to bring everyone closer together. After all, what brings people closer to a sense of purpose than a ritual sacrifice? Which reminds me, I need to pick up a goat for my Thursday Mass coming up. The second important aspect I consider religion to have is bestowing a sense of purpose or place for its adherents. Religion, both real and fictional, always tries to do its best to make you feel welcome within its ranks. Whenever this be through genuine friendship or the realization that you're an insignificant speck in comparison to the old ones and the world really should be burned down, after all, is completely irrelevant. If the religion wants you as a member, they'll attempt to welcome you with open arms, explaining their view of the world, both physical and metaphysical, for explaining what your role in the grand scheme of things truly is. This is important as some people who join religion may not overly care about the messages the religion seeks to impart. Some may just want to do it for the company or other reasons entirely. For example, one of the reasons the Vikings themselves switched over to Christianity wasn't because of them having some kind of divine revelation that God is real, but apparently it was mostly due to political reasons. It is in my humble opinion that one of the defining attributes of being human is wanting to have a sense of purpose, the sense that you can fit in and do something within this world. If you've had an existential crisis in your life, then you'll know exactly what I mean. But if you haven't, then it feels almost as if you're an eternal wanderer. You feel as if you're searching for a home that you can never remember, always being haunted by the sensation that you're a stranger in some sort of foreign land. You may find the places you visit nice and the people friendly, but it never just does feel quite right for you. You don't get the sense of comfort that one could feel resting within their home. And by home, I don't mean your house, I mean general place to stay within society at large. This is what I mean by a sense of belonging. Some may never experience it and may take it for granted, but for many, they can go mad on a journey to find this sense of belonging. For some, this feeling may be confusing, to others, absolutely alien, and are wondering why someone would even be disturbed by something as trivial like this in the first place. But for those who do care, it literally eats away at their soul and is a constant weight on their shoulders, haunting them at nearly every time of day until they finally find closure. The last is that it seeks to impart some sense of codified morals amongst its population, and with it, a certain sense of safety for the group. As I mentioned in the last video, traditions people have within culture are kept for a reason, whenever that reason is real or perceived. When religions pass down a sense of morals, such as the 10 Commandments in the Old Testament or the Four Noble Truths in Buddhism, they're all about how one should interact with their own life. It is always crucial that before you toss out anything for being ignorant or barbaric, one should always try and consider the context or reason such things exist. Let's do a small example on the 10 Commandments, removing all religious overtones from them briefly to illustrate my point. Thou shalt not kill is pretty self-explanatory. You're not going to have a stable or growing society where people are allowed to kill each other for whatever minor quibble you may be having. This could be explained in Christian metaphysics that God was the one who made life. Therefore, it is only God that should have the right to take life away. If you violate this, then chances are you're going straight to hell. And while you may fool a moral judge, you'll never fool God himself. This implicit threat of being punished in the afterlife, and the place you'll go to after you shed your mortal shell and spend eternity in after, is the metaphysical threat. And if you want to use another religion besides Christianity, you could probably say something like, your soul will be corrupted if you take these actions instead. But regardless of the metaphysical reason itself, the end result is that there is one less death in the village. If there is less death, then the village become more stable and grow out from there. In cultures where death is allowed in society, then typically only highly codified rules and traditions exist around such an ordeal, such as proper duels to settle disputes. This dramatically increases the chances that you'll obey the laws of the land provided to and adhere to the sense of community and culture within the area. If you decide to kill the man who wronged you in his sleep instead of honorable combat, then you may be only seen as a coward to be either executed or banished from the lands you reside in. See what I mean by this subject being multifaceted? Each of these reasons is not only complex, but typically serve to reinforce one another. Likewise, as these morals continue to reinforce and spread amongst his followers, it begins to have an everyday impact on their lives. These rules are not only social guidelines, but sink deep within the moral fabric of the population at large, defining what is acceptable and unacceptable behavior for both peasant and nobility alike. If one claims they are a true believer of faith, then they're going to have to walk the walk. Even religions which allow for enormous exceptions will have a limit to the number of things people and they will put up with. An example of this can be found within the Immaculate Faith within creation. The Dragon-Blooded are given enormous leeway within the context of the faith, but if you find yourself stretching the line too far and carelessly slaughter peasants as part of your afternoon games, then don't be surprised when the Immaculate Monks show up at your door to shove a boot right up your ass. The end result and reassurance religion seeks to offer is that if you follow the rules they set forth, then you will either find your place in the world, know how to act in public, and have either you or those you care about remain safe and prosperous. Unless you're an insane Elder One cult that thinks killing those you love is actually a form of mercy to spare them from the true end of the universe. Either or. Now you're probably wondering why I took my dear sweet time to explain all that garbage. Why I bothered to tell things that you could say about our world rather than applying it to just creation itself. Consider this the water you've been given to drink before I dunk your entire head into how things differ in creation. No matter the setting, you're going to find some aspects of how some themes trace back to our reality. Such as war. War never changes. So how does religion differ in creation? Well, for one, there is no question whenever spirits exist. There is no question of whether or not there are some sort of supernatural entities possessing powers that set them apart from man itself. In fact, such thing is common knowledge. The harvest god is known to sell homemade pies at his shrine. The dogs of the earth occasionally eat the bandits that attack your town in exchange for some meat. You are fortunate enough to get advice from your great-grandfather's shrine in times you need counsel you can trust, and the exorcist in your village always keeps a vigil on the demon sealed deep within the mountain shrine that only your town knows of, the one that makes horrible, inhuman noises at night. When you pray, you're not receiving a vague sense of being touched by some higher being, but quite possibly actual tangible results in the form of potent supernatural blessings. Blessings that typically unfold right in front of your very eyes rather than in nebulous or vague fashions. And when others look upon this miracle at work, there's going to be no question that it's some sort of supernatural occurrence at work itself. This begs the question, why do gods want or even care about religions? After all, most types of spirits have some form of immortality, so why do they even care about mortals at all? Why should the gods do the things they do for mortals rather than just telling them to piss off? To understand this, we first need to fundamentally understand how the divine works within Exalted. The detailed workings of spirits will be covered in a later section, but knowing at least a little bit of this goes an immense way to understanding the spiritual realm and workings of Exalted itself. Exalted isn't like our Western view of the capital G God or the Dungeons & Dragons worship of lofty gods who only live in the divine realm of heaven or some other sort of higher plane which normally mortals do not see or touch. Instead, Exalted tells you that spirits exist nearly everywhere. There may be a god of cities who resides in heavens, that overlooks all cities within creation, but also there's a city god that overlooks the direct well-being of your own city or village. Some gods rule over vast and wide purviews, but each of them are broken down into an overall hierarchy. The unconquered sun is the ruler of all gods in the universe, who Mars, the goddess of war, reports to. The directional war gods of creation all report to Mars, and something akin to provincial war gods could report to the directional war gods, and so forth. There isn't one grand god on top of things, employing subordinates who do things in place of their master. Each of these gods employ purviews that look over that specific area. They control that area, and so long as they don't piss off their neighbors and do their assigned tasks, then they can do whatever they please. Exalted in this sense is more closely related to Japanese Shintoism or other Asian mythologies at base compared to things like a westernized view of religion. I even see some mixtures of Native American mythology in there as well. Things are a lot more coded in animism, to the point of where seeing a spirit is a divine revelation. So long as you don't live under a rock, then you either know one directly or are a friend of one. Now, time to stop dodging my question. Why do spirits care whenever mortals worship them or not? Are you ready for the answer? The answer is considerably complex and multifaceted, whose correct answer heavily depends upon the spirit in question. Which I know is driving you bonkers by now, but trust me in saying that understanding how such an engine works under the hood can be quite tricky indeed. Many factors can attribute to why spirits crave worship. Things such as power, greed, or sense of status amongst your peers. Now the weight and importance of each of these things can vary spirit to spirit, or even types of spirits. But those are some of the significant reasons of why spirits want human worship. If you notice that these spiritual concerns are close or similar to what mortals have, then you are absolutely correct that this is wholly intended. As I mentioned before, Exalted doesn't put gods on a high pedestal like other settings. Beings wise and powerful beyond all measure whom you only interact with in vague ways. You're expected to communicate with spirits quite regularly, and personally, I believe this is a strength. You can play up how alien or strange something is in writing, but in-game, I mostly consider all smoke and mirrors or don't look at the man behind the curtain. If something is genuinely alien and unknowable, then the human mind wouldn't be able to even conceive of it. Granted, spirits and mortals accomplish these things in entirely different ways, however. A mortal would get stronger by training or building an army. A Fae would get stronger by fashioning his love for combat into an epic poem whose metaphor he wields in battles. Yes, I mentioned Fae. Not literally spirits, but we'll touch on them later too. So let's jump into one of the main reasons spirits often expand their worship and tribute. Power. Simply by having your own band of dedicated worshippers grants the spirit many different types and forms of power. For one, it grants you influence over a large group of people. Remember what I said earlier about religion shaping societal norms? This is a significant thing that's often overlooked in many different games and settings. You have a semi-direct method to influence great control over one's life and what exactly their morals and attitudes should be. If you're a god that prizes honor, never backing down from a confrontation, and taking what is rightfully yours, your people could very easily have a more martial bent to them, allowing them to become more accepting of needing to raid others for supplies, or even easier to call to war. Even if the god in question isn't a war god, but more like a city god, or perhaps even a harvest god. Now, if the spirit tends to practice compassion, cooperation, and harmony, then the citizens might be more willing to overlook such transgressions and seek to mend any misunderstandings they have with newcomers. Before you realize the city god is actually a demon who encourages blood sacrifice. This is why occult and lore are important things to have, children. But worship and tribute paid by mortals in this sense also translates to direct physical power for most spirits. Typically, spirits are assigned an essence value at their creation. It can go up or down as time goes on, but for spirits, their essence increases only as their domain itself increases. A city god will become stronger and larger the more successful his city is. An ancestor spirit will become stronger the larger and more successful his family becomes. And a Fae will become stronger as greater upon greater stories of him spread across the land. There will always be exceptions to this, such as elementals getting naturally stronger over time, or God's essence ratings and capabilities shifting quite dramatically depending on the nerd purview. But I feel it's safe to assume for the majority of spirits. We'll get into more specific differences later. Now you see that cult background in the book? The majority of spirits tend to get far more significant benefits from having a bigger cult. And I don't mean things such as a mere few extra dice. No. I mean things such as significantly increased stats, an increase to their permanent essence, and brand new or powerful upgrades to their current existing charms. If his town god has an extremely dedicated cult, then he's likely to punch significantly above his weight class than what is normally expected for his other spiritual peers. Merely by being worshipped, spirits can become stronger than what their station normally allows. Typically, this is a mutually beneficial agreement for both the spirit and those living under its protection or purview. The spirit does their job, and in return, they naturally become stronger by those they serve. Now, can this system be abused and exploited with corruption? In a platonic form of creation, people would only worship out of their own free will. Gods and elementals would manage their purviews without complaint, ghosts would respectfully remain in the underworld, demons would be tightly bound by the leash of their masters, the Fae would amuse themselves in the wild, and the censors employed by Yu-Shan would weed out any sense or trace of corruption and punish those responsible. So how far off is creation from this ideal? The answer? It's as pure and noble as Rogara's own little Black Ledger book. Those in creation don't live in the Platonic version of the world. They live in a post-fallen Rome era. Even the most noble of spirits see the necessity of bending the rules when trying to follow them, or in some cases, just straight up bending them and breaking them across their knee. Normally, gods are only supposed to use their powers as the situation demands. A city god typically lets his city run as normal, but may exert his power in order to correct things, such as minor fate errors in causality caused by the fate or Wyld, talking on behalf of his city to other deities, or, in some cases, protecting those inside of his city by giving them minor supernatural blessings, or toughening up his defenses in time of a siege, or making a thief get lost in alleyways so the mortal guards have a chance to catch him. What a city god shouldn't care about is whenever some new businessman is out competing your own local business. However, with the magic of bribery, we can get the god to give a little helping hand of sorts. Your company could offer a holiday to the city god, led by trained and talented priests to the city god. Suddenly, the competing business will find themselves offset by many strange and annoying problems. A sudden spike in thievery in your specific area, travel papers inexplicably disappearing from the city's entrance checkpoint, wagon axles breaking in the middle of a busy street, or the leading supplier being unable to find their rival business as masses of people casually overlook the shopfront in front of busy crowds. Even major gods such as Alot are not exempt from this. If his followers are dead set on attacking you and he only has a minor intimacy towards you, then at best he might be able to do is just gently nudge his followers away from such a course of action, which in some cases is as good as a pebble trying to stop a boulder barreling down a hill. But if you're prepared to make a ceremony to him where you're ready to offer 1,000 sacrificial cattle to him, then he's far more likely to become heavily involved, stepping in front of his priestesses and saying, "Now hold on a minute, let's listen to what this guy has to say." Typically, no god in their right mind would turn this down. It's like being offered $2,395 to tell a friend to buy Monster brand energy drinks. The energy drink with a smooth and rich taste that's fit to keep your eyes wide open and your concentration focused, be it through coding, writing, or sports. In fact, I always keep one close to my desk for those late night writing marathons, but also to devour any thirst I may have. Speaking of which... Oh man! I can't feel my face. I'm touching it, but I can't feel my face. I can't feel my face! This is assuming, of course, that the god is generous enough to do his job without asking for something in return first. With the power to manipulate and control their purviews, many gods may resort to flat-out extortion in order to boost their standing. Having a god's cult attack you or to harbor and form conspiracies is only one of the ideas that could happen, and is something that's done in countless other media examples. For example, if a volcano god decides that your tributes are not enough lately, then it would be a shame if your highly flammable huts were in the path of an erupting volcano. And when your purview includes managing lava flows, then everything is flammable. A river god could overflow a town's rivers and drown their crops unless the town grants him an additional holiday in order to keep up with the uppity bastard river gods to the south, thinking they're so special just because some salmon swim through their rivers. Fucking pricks! Occasionally, the worst can come to pass, and a powerful spirit could advocate for his followers to attack another god's area in the name of righteous fury, be it for matters of honor or wanting for something the other god has. Are there checks and balances in place of this? Of course there are! Enter the Yu-Shan censors. Censors are potent spirits, typically lesser elemental dragons, who ensure that gods are not only doing their jobs, but are also being nice to each other and the mortals within the area itself. Don't let the term lesser fool you in lesser elemental dragon. Such creatures are often plenty sufficient to break many gods over their knees, and even quite a few player characters. If you want an idea of how powerful they are, go ahead and look at Fakaru in the rulebook. Such creatures not only have immense strength, but literally the backing of heaven itself to back up their judgment for gods, elementals, demons, or other spirits that step out of line. Surely these fearsome beasts are paragons of justice who feast on a diet of corruption. Oh, they're snorting cocaine on the back of hookers. Shit. Putting memes aside, it's been the trend in Exalted that most censors don't particularly care much about their jobs, instead typically chasing after things that tickle their fancy. Barring any content changes from the new edition, Fakaru is shacked up with his mortal wife and is perfectly content with being a normal husband, while Swan Dragon is crippled and has amnesia. Part of this is setting material, meant to emphasize the dire state of the world itself, how it needs correction that your characters are intended to solve. The other part of this is that if censors are too good at their jobs, then spirits may get uppity. Even in current reality, laws are sometimes bent in order to ensure that everyday life flows smoothly, where crime syndicates have been known to form unspoken agreements with law authorities. An example in Mexico comes from tourists themselves. Yes, the police know people come down to Mexico to buy drugs from criminal organizations. But there's some sort of unwritten rule in place that both the police and the cartels adhere to. Don't rock the cruise ship. The police and the cartels realize that these tourists bring loads of money into the country. Therefore, the cartels typically agree to handle any disagreements they have with one another outside the tourist areas, and in exchange, the police overlook that area in favor of bigger fish. Exceptions do sometimes occur, such as kidnapping for ransom, but this is more the exception rather than the norm. So long as no one is harmed and no shootouts occur, both sides look past one another. If they don't, then no tourists come to the area, money stops coming into the country, and no one is happy. The other stipulation is if the situation involves the censor's own job itself. Remember, a censor's main job is to enforce the law of heavens, not anyone or anything else's. If your business is being messed up by a city god and both sides present it to the censor, and let's just say the impossible happens so the censor even gives enough of a shit to impartially judge your case without external influence, then the censor might side with the city god itself. The reason being is because the censor agrees with the city god's judgment that, given your recent business practices, you're likely to drive out all of local business from the town, harming the god's overall purview. Likewise, a plague of locusts sweep through an area, and you protest to the god a pest in the area is causing your people to starve. The censor's response could very well be,
"Of course the locusts ate your crops, but I don't see how the pest god has anything to do with it. Pests tend to eat crops by their design. Not my problem. Go away." Though my tip jar has been feeling a little light as of late, so if you, I don't know, leave a small token of thanks, and that would be great. Please, my anniversary's coming up, and I have absolutely nothing given to my wife.
So if the censors are of no use, then it falls to the mortals on the ground and the champions of humanity, the Exalted. Long ago, during the First Age, the Exalted kept whatever rogue gods within their lands in check, and the censors were not nearly as corrupt. However, such days have long passed. Individual mortal priests or shaman may have silver tongues and knowledge of the surroundings, but it does little good if they're not able to back up their words. You can proclaim moral right all you want, but in the Age of Sorrows, such thing means dick all if you don't have the force or political clout to back up your claim. Individual Exalted can undoubtedly back up such claims. In fact, the best way to terrorize a spirit is to simply possess a spirit destruction charm, such as Ghost Eating Technique. A spirit charm called Measure the Wind allows spirits to sense the powers of others, but more importantly, scans for spiritual destruction charms such as these. If an immortal being knows that you have the ability to straight up kill them permanently, then they're far more willing to heed your words. Because, after all, if you're an ageless, immortal being, then one of the things you're going to fear, most of all, is the great unknown of permanent death. The alternative approach involves bringing in the big guns. All throughout creation, spirits have heard about the Immaculate Order. The Immaculate Order possesses both the strength and the political clout necessary to back up their words, and a stick far enough up their ass to resist being bribed. Dragon-blooded may indeed be the weakest type of Exalted currently published, but that hardly matters. The Immaculate Order themselves have an entire force of dedicated monks who specialize in handling spiritual disturbances and problems. To your average spirit, these are not your everyday, normal Dragon-blooded. These are advanced Dragon-blooded ass-kickers who handle punks like you all the time. If you want to raise your army to oppose them, then your arrogance had best match your strength. The Immaculate Order has many favors owed to it by Dragonblood society as well, and seeing a realm army garrison just outside your territory isn't completely outside the realm of possibility when dealing with the Immaculate Order. The strongest army in the world, backed up by elemental superhuman commanders, topped off by a dedicated anti-spirit hit squad. Unless you're one of the stronger spirits within the setting, something within the Essence 8 or higher range, then your chances of victory is, well, let's just say a snowball has a better chance of not melting inside the mouth of a furnace rhino. But of course, this is the hammer of the Immaculate Order. The benefits they can offer to spirits can be just as tempting. After all, the Immaculate Order are not ungrateful, inflexible assholes. Okay, at least not all of them. The Immaculate Order still advocates for harmony within the natural cycle of things. And one of those ideas is that gods do get praised for doing a good job. When an Immaculate Shrine moves into an area, then one of the things they will do is that they will set aside a holiday for you or take part in a ceremony as far as the Immaculate Doctrine allows. To lesser gods, this is a huge deal. The fact that you get your own holiday with a ritual ceremony conducted by competent and well-trained priests, this is an enormous deal. Many lesser gods don't even have a priest, let alone a cult. While they may get offerings of a token thanks from people, there's still a matter of doing things properly. Think of it like food. Would you like to have 100 slices of processed sandwich meat, or would you rather have a hunk of roast beef made by a chef instead? Quality very much does matter over quantity in such an area. Likewise, the Immaculate Order will take measures to make sure that your purview is protected from outside influence, and help give you some much needed clout when bartering with other divinities in the area. Many pieces of Exalted fiction, chats, or memes may deal with how the Immaculate Order is a group of assholes. Such a thing is partially true. After all, memes and jokes tend to have some layer of truth to them. But it doesn't mean they're all entirely bad. In fact, they do much good for around creation, even for other spirits themselves. Hell, sometimes it's often the spirits who contact the Immaculate Order themselves. Is there not a reason to go with the Immaculate Order? Of course, several major ones in fact. First is, once they're in your area, they're often there for life. Like a gang initiation, there's no going back on such a thing. If you invite the Immaculate Order into your lands, then boot them out later by force, then they're going to remember that. Assuming you can even do that in the first place, as you'll often need to uproot an entire realm garrison and presence within an area. Far easier said than done. Second is that the Immaculates strictly adhere to their calendar for ceremonies, and in the vast majority of cases, disallow any worship outside those days. You can still be thanked with a small bow and word of thanks, but your invite-only pre-harvest festival celebration isn't going to fly with them. This means that stronger gods, or ones with more influential purviews, could stand more to gain if the Immaculates left the area. Cultural suppression is often another major factor. Once an Immaculate moves into the area, then the chances of them caring for your primary culture's traditions around worship are slim. The Immaculates are going to adhere to their standards only. Maybe a little flex space, but I don't imagine a lot. Things like animal sacrifice may still be accepted, but if your ceremony often involves two warriors fighting to the death as part of the celebration, then the chances are that bit of your worship is going to disappear against you or your people's wishes. Again, there are some exceptions towards this. For example, if your ritual worship specifically involves two people fighting to the death to make sure that the everything-ending horror beneath your city doesn't wake up, then yes, the Immaculate Order is going to allow that on terms of self-preservation. At least until the amount of time it takes for them to call in some sort of brotherhood or reinforcements or investigation team to figure out just what the hell is going on with this. Lastly is that the Immaculates are not as tolerable towards anything that are not gods. Elementals will most likely be tolerated and treated like gods if they're polite and generally help the area itself. But if you're a demon, ghost, or fae, then chances are they're only going to just tolerate you at best. Such spirits are seen as existing outside the natural cycle of creation. And according to the Immaculates, if such people are worshipping them, then those poor souls are being pulled off the proper path of spiritual enlightenment. If you're a lunar or solar exalted, then soul help you. The last, and most extreme method that doesn't involve killing a spirit, is sidereal intervention. Now, if this happens as a spirit, then you've gone and really fucked up. Most Sidriels speak with the voice and authority of heaven at best, or have an entire charm set dedicated to dealing with spirits at worst. Younger or more inexperienced spirits may not know who these Exalts are, but they'll quickly remember after seeing everything they love disappear, or gods suddenly finding themselves no longer managing their purview for being fired. If a Sidriel is on your case, then it's going to be when, not if, he's going to find your dirty laundry. Your typical Sidriel won't have the same sort of authority or even raw power as your typical censor would have, but rest assured they're more than capable of issuing out the proper punishments as they see fit. Especially since that Sidriel could very likely be a tea-buddy with your boss's boss's boss. Failing that, they can punch you into a duck for dinner. No, I literally mean they can totally turn your divine ass into a duck that goes great with orange sauce. If Sidriels are a problem for Lunars or Solars, then they're exponentially worse to not just your average spirit, but to all spirits. To oppose a dedicated Sidriel, a spirit will often need significant political clout and personal power, and even then, it's still going to be an uphill battle for them. Now, do you see why I said the topic of religion in creation was handled better in this video? Not only is it complicated, but the moral and the divine are so heavily intertwined that it's hard to discuss one without discussing the other. All this detail, and we've only discussed what I could consider the general metaphysics for spirits. But Yu-Shan, the realm of gods, is only one such place where spirits reside. As you may have noticed, there are many other places in creation where spirits reside. So, what about these places? How do they differ from Yu-Shan in creation? And how do the spirits there cope with their day-to-day lives? And more importantly, how are they different from creation itself? Part 2. Other spiritual realms. Similar to other fantasy settings, Exalted has several different realms, for lack of a better term. I don't mean the capital R Dragon-blooded realm, but instead I mean alternative lands that coexist alongside creation. In a sense, they could be called different dimensions that share the majority of creation's metaphysics, but are entirely different lands. Each of these things have some sort of hand involved in creation, heavily intertwined in both its history and how things currently are in the world of creation. More importantly, each tends to have their own sort of native spirit associated with them, each of them having some sort of stake with the realm they live in. The first realm we'll take a close look at is creation itself. Creation serves as the MacGuffin to a great many number of the supernatural forces within the world of Exalted and creation, each one of them wanting a slice of the pie or wanting to pluck out a particular cherry in that pie for themselves. A lot of creation is already well explained in the book, so I feel that we shouldn't need to explain something that is overly explored. But an important thing to keep in mind is that creation is a place of wonder and mystery, both in character and out of character. You don't have to go to any other realms if you don't want to, as creation itself should have more than enough material for everyone. If Exalted is the kitchen sink of fantasy games, then creation would be the sink, housing everything from epic tales of Greek or Norse myths to fulfilling the memes of having herring-pissing dinosaurs and courtesan-run water parks. Because each realm within Exalted has some sort of tie to creation itself, I'll be discussing how those ties exist briefly when talking about the realm itself later in this video. When it comes to native spirits, creation is incredibly varied in that aspect, being some sort of sink melting pot. I can assure you that for every spirit mentioned in this video, even those not spoken, there will be some faction of them calling creation their home, and every faction that seeks to expel them on grounds for being a nuisance for another faction will quickly leap to their defense, as they stand to gain from those spirits being there in the first place. But if I had to nail down the native spirit of creation itself, I would have to pick a two-way split between elementals and gods. Creation itself is a place that is brimming with life, nature, and raw elemental energies. It should come as no surprise that these energies would eventually gather forth and form elementals born in the untamed wilderness or forgotten corners of creation. The terrestrial gods also call creation home, gods whose purviews are relatively local in scope. What is a terrestrial god in more detail, you ask? Well, let's go ahead and jump headlong into a section that will answer that question. Yu-Shan is the divine realm that is better known as Heaven. It's a magical city of gods where streets are paved with gold, its buildings priceless pieces of arts, where only the finest wines and foods are eaten, and where the importance and power of its divine inhabitants is rivaled only by their overinflated and bloated egos. Yu-Shan is home to none other than the Incarnate, the highest ranking and most powerful gods in the entire setting, with the entire divine celestial host serving under them. In Exalted, gods are broken up into three main areas: Celestial, Terrestrial, and Forbidden. Celestial gods are gods whose purviews encompass a wide area, either both physically or metaphysically. Gods such as truth, health, fortune, luck, or even an entire direction call Yu-Shan their home. It's where the divine spirits have their power meetings over tea before heading back to their offices to fill out mountains upon mountains of paperwork. They're the managerial or upper staff of creation itself. Or they just offload all their paperwork onto the underlings, just like every other office space does. Terrestrial gods are the label given to gods who call creation home. Their purviews are much smaller in scope, only calling a single road, village, or possibly even province their home. Because of how involved they are with affairs on the ground, they typically don't go to Yu-Shan barring dire circumstances, important meetings, or calibration celebrations. In fact, many terrestrial gods cannot even enter Yu-Shan itself unless they have important business. This is often known to create a rift between the terrestrial and the celestial gods. The former seeing gods in Yu-Shan as nothing more than self-righteous and overly pompous jerks, while the latter see terrestrial gods being ignored or ignorant of the larger picture itself. Now, does that mean the celestial and terrestrial gods are continually pushing back and forth against each other as some sort of petty rivalry? Not all the time. There are some places in creation where the system works strong and well. Other parts of creation could see it breaking down entirely, with the terrestrial gods deciding to rule over parts of creation, especially if their directional censor is lax in its patrolling duties. But after spending some time in a similar bureaucratic role, you do learn at times that the ones from below can push up against those at top. Why are you telling me to do this? Not my area, not my problem. Is asked before being met with, I just asked 6 other areas and talked to 2 other bureaus, and it just so happens that this is magically nobody's problem. I'm not asking you to fix it, I'm telling you to fix it. At the end of this little push-pull dance, one side begrudgingly relents and does what they're told. But the important part is, at the end of it all, they realize that they're all in the same boat. While something doesn't need a god to function, creation cannot work without Yu-Shan. At least not for very long. Everyone is on the same boat, so do your best and make sure the damn thing doesn't sink. Plugging holes and pumping water is a crappy job, but somebody has to do it. The last type of gods are the forbidden gods. Gods who have rebelled against heaven, are incredibly hostile, or are just plain assholes whom no one wants to deal with. Note that a god's purview usually has no bearing on this list, as Yu-Shan quite happily houses gods belonging to slavery, misery, suffering, and other such things without any qualms. It almost has to do exclusively with their behavior. An example of this listed is Hantha, the god of decay. Usually this job would entail one to look at all the features that come with the purview decay, breaking down the dead and useless to let brand new life flourish. But instead of signing paperwork, Hantha decided to eat the bodies of his dead godly brethren with other disgusting, unspeakable matter. His excuse for this is,
I'm just acting with my purview. There's nothing to be mad about.
which may be accurate, but just because the god of rebellion and anarchy refuses to be a part of Heaven's reporting structure doesn't make them into automatic raging assholes. Who knows? Maybe the god of rebellion is actually a really neat and cool dude during his downtime. And while he may be horrible for filing a report, urgent matters are at least completed in a timely fashion. So yeah, typically you have to try really hard to get on this list, or piss off someone really powerful and influential. Now, in terms of their population, does Yu-Shan have exclusively gods living inside of it? Not even close. While it's true the majority of spirits living in Yu-Shan are some sort of god, not everyone is a god. Powerful or influential elementals could call this divine realm home. The Sidriel Exalted are known to house their offices here, or even a lucky few mortals could call this land home. Being one of the incredibly rare and lucky mortals who reside in such a land, or having a powerful divine patron, they call their parent. By the law of the Incarnate, no demon may step foot on Yu-Shan itself. In response to this, the embassy of Hell is located on a flying yacht, which is an excellent example of how to just barely be within the rules, looking across that line and then spitting directly over it. Access to heaven itself is fairly restricted. Only Sidriels, officially recognized celestial gods, eclipse cast solars, special invitations, or very lucky people are allowed inside of heaven, and in only a handful of gates scattered and hidden across creation. The only exception to this rule is during calibration, where anyone who isn't a demon is allowed into Yu-Shan to drink and party for a week-long celebration. If you can't get normal access to Yu-Shan, then this would be your only time to conduct whatever business you have there. Or get pissed loaded drunk and get so high on drugs that you lose all sense of self. What happens in Yu-Shan, stays in Yu-Shan. And just to take a little tiny leap back for a second, because I realized I didn't explain it. Calibration in creation is the 5-day holiday between years that's the gap in between calendar. Basically, it's traditionally held that really freaky stuff happens during this time, so many people typically stay inside their houses or village and just party for the 5 days that's during calibration. These days are also very important metaphysically as well, as quite a few charms, sorcery, or powers depend on the timing and calibration itself. It's a time when the layer between the realms itself becomes the thinnest, so traveling between them becomes a lot easier too. So in short, if you need to take anything out from the Calibration Festival, just think of a 5-day holiday where really interesting things could happen, both good and bad, and people getting drunk all the time. Finally, we reach what I consider the last important feature of Yu-Shan, quintessence and ambrosia. Remember all that talk I gave a while back about how worship was important to gods? There's another purpose here in Yu-Shan itself. The energy given off by prayer solidifies into actual physical substances. Depending on the quality and quantity of worship, prayer can solidify into either quintessence or ambrosia. Quintessence and ambrosia are roughly the same substance, and what's magical about this substance is that one can use it to make almost anything they want. You want gold? To hell with mining. That's for terrestrial gods. All you need to do is simply take your quintessence or ambrosia and simply make it into gold. Hell, why stop there? Make it into gold chairs and tables encrusted with jewels. This flexibility of currency is why heaven appears to be so rich and why native creation currency is almost worthless in comparison. Why bother trading silver or heavily diluted pieces of jade when one can use their native currency to not only make more of it, but of higher quality to boot? There are differences between ambrosia and quintessence, but the hard and fast rule is to try to think as ambrosia as a more refined and potent version of quintessence. Ambrosia itself appears as a rainbow-colored glob with a texture of bubblegum and a taste of sweet candy like chocolate. While it may be a waste to eat a stick of ambrosia that can be transmuted into a gold bar, newly hired Sidriels are advised not to eat their early salary. I say to hell with that. It's my payment, I'm going to eat it however I damn well please. Now even terrestrial gods receive quintessence and ambrosia, but the catch to all this is that neither of them can be taken outside of heaven. You can shape either one of the two into a piece of gold and carry it outside of heaven just fine, but you can't take your rainbow wonder candy with you. Since terrestrial gods mainly reside in creation and seldom visit heaven, they have little use for such substances. Many of them likely just have some sort of bank account set up in heaven to manage any incoming wonder candy, likely only using it to get some gold or other valuable resource to bring back to creation when need be. It may be small, but if you're a god of a forge, then getting the highest quality metal to craft a masterwork blade can save some of that messy hassle of trying to deal with a merchant. Also note, it doesn't have to be gods. In fact, anyone who receives worship will receive quintessence and ambrosia in Yu-Shan. Typically, it materializes right next to them as soon as they appear in heaven, so there's no shortage of it. And if you do need quintessence, a lot of quintessence is often given out as a sort of welfare benefit to many gods who do not have jobs or purviews in heaven itself, so they can maintain some sort of form of life. Little hint, don't go to the Yu-Shan slums. Yu-Shan may be the safest place in the entire game, but the slums can be a very dangerous place if you are not experienced. Or if you're a Dawn, it can be just like any other place in the world. Only the patron is a lot more powerful, so it's going to be more fun for you. So now that we have an idea of how the divine realm works in creation, the shining beacon high up in the sky, what about the place where the sun is never known to shine? Where the dead walk the earth and the main color palette has less variety than 2000 arrow shooters? Chances are that you're likely talking about the Underworld. The Underworld of Exalted is known as the Land of the Dead. It is not your traditional Western hell, so rather there are no demons or devils shooting people in the ass when they try to escape from rivers of boiling blood. Rather, the Underworld in creation is a land soaked in eerie tranquility, only broken up by its rather lively native inhabitants' refusal to go quietly into the night. While Yu-Shan is relatively safe, the Underworld has all manner of horrors that will want you to suffer just as they did in life. Lost souls whose mind and sanity have been long since worn away by the grindstone of time. Nephrak cultists who follow the dark whispers of the Neverborn, compelling them to bring about the end of the world. The serpentine plans of the Death Lord, whose power is only matched by their age and wisdom. The tombs of once great rulers of the world, whose bodies are now mausoleum of every sort of suffering one could possibly imagine. And the noble ancestor ghosts, whose courts are always on the rager's edge of fighting off their rivals' own plans, and the oblige of those who worship them back in creation. Then you have the poor bastards caught in the middle of all this, who come to quickly realize that the Underworld is no place for a soul that still draws breath. Even the very land itself is something that's choked with the stench of death. The majority of plants fail to grow at all, and those that do bear meddling yields. The water is stained black with ichor, which is not dyed red by the rainfalls of blood. And the animals you do raise for livestock may not live to adulthood without exceptional care. Those poor bastards who do live in the Underworld are often described as having set one foot inside of death's door, even at their healthiest. Frail bodies and pale skin making them stand out wherever they go. I was not kidding when I said the Underworld is not a place for a mortal soul. Out of all the other realms in Exalted, I'd have to call the Underworld the second most hostile place for all life, with only the Wyld coming close to its level of hostility towards any mortal inhabitants. Ghosts are the native spirits that call the Underworld home. And while there are stranger things that exist in the Underworld, the majority of the population are still ghosts. The Underworld may have stranger inhabitants, things such as Abyssal Death Knights, the enigmatic Liminal Exalted, all the way up to the terrifying Hekantar. Things that are not exactly ghosts, but still drenched in the stench of death. The other reason for this is that the very essence that permeates the Underworld is intolerable to many other types of spirits. Gods and elementals find the very air uncomfortable and weaken them over time. Demons find the landscape a living nightmare and a haunting reminder of what could have been if their primordial masters fell in the war. While the majority of the Fae find the Underworld anti-theatrical to their very being. The Fae's desire to be free and chaotic is a hard counter to the Underworld's static and stagnant nature. 3rd edition is attempting to add some more things to help vary up the Underworld. But so long as you're here and want to add something death-focused, it should be fine. For example, in my games I often have Shikigami, several types of spirits native to the Underworld, yet under the employ of heaven to help ferry the souls of the dead in creation to the Underworld, or ideally to their final resting place. The Underworld is also a place I'd personally call the most directly tied to creation. At any point inside of creation where death and suffering run rampant, there is a risk of a Shadowland to form. A Shadowland is an area where both creation and the Underworld overlap one another. A mixture of both rather than entirely being one or the other. During the day, some traits of the Underworld manifest in these areas, such as the land struggling to support life or the sun growing dim, but is not as extreme as in the Underworld itself. During the night, however, all bets are off, as the gap between creation and the Underworld narrows down to a razor-thin margin. So thin that if you want to travel to the Underworld, then all one needs to do is try to venture outside the Shadowland at night, and presto, you're automatically in the Underworld. Shadowlands are also far more common than Celestial Gates of Yu-Shan, so finding one is trivially easy. Making one is also an ever-present danger as well. There is a reason why in creation that even bloodthirsty tyrants will bury the armies of even their most hated opponents with respect, because 1. They don't want a Shadowland to form with undead monsters coming out at night in their territory, and 2. They don't want the spirits of those they killed to come back under the command of a Nephrak or, God forbid, Abyssal Exalted. Typically, one soul isn't enough to open a Shadowland. Usually, it's only once you start killing over 100 people that the Underworld will try to reach up and claw its way into creation. As with everything, circumstances and exceptions play slowly into this. If you cause immense suffering and trauma to souls before killing them, then each one probably has a higher weight of someone who just randomly died on the spot. Sometimes, however, significant exceptions could exist, such as a widow who held unspeakable grief dying before her lover returned home. Such a thing could create a very small and localized Shadowland within a specific mansion. The last feature of the Underworld is the one I find the most intriguing about it: the echoes of the past. The Underworld consists in a state of flux of sorts, a place where the collective psychic imprint of the past places its mark on the Underworld. Great crusades or epic battles that happen in creation are current events in the Underworld. Add in multiple eras of the past colliding, epic heroes who still seek their path even after death, and the Underworld's own native forces, and you've got something like the Avengers happening with relative frequency. Echoes of the past could swell up, replaying the last stage of a tragic or epic battle, resetting back to the start when one side actually claims victory over the other. Talking to the soldiers of such battles could lead to them having a one-track mind, many of them believing they're not dead and they're still holding the line for the shogunate dynamo they serve. Or how about a village that constantly replays the tragedies of the Great Contagion incident over and over again, doomed to be forever slain by the most potent zombie forces created by the Great Contagion itself. In my own personal view, I tend to see eras of creation existing within superposition on top of one another. That is to say, a city has both its Great Contagion eras and Shogunate eras existing within the same space, but are somewhat isolated from each other. For example, walking down a specific pattern of streets could lead you into the Age of Sorrow cities, the Shogunate, or the Great Contagion era cities. Think of this like a fourth dimensional rule if I had to use that.
Sand Act! This place sounds like a complete shithole of a setting that makes Dark Souls look like a paradise. Why would I ever want to go to such a place, much less run a game there?
You are correct in that Dark Souls would be the closest analog I can think of in the Underworld, which, if that intrigues you, then go ahead and run that. What other reasons would you need, however? Ever heard of the phrase, dead men tell no tales? Thanks to the Underworld, that little saying is no longer true. The Underworld contains realms upon realms of ancient and forbidden knowledge whose risks are only matched by the rewards. If an ancient castle in creation was burned down in an effort for the realm to bar you from gaining access to a map displaying the location of an ancient solar tomb, then that map could very still be alive and well in the Underworld. Okay, dead and well. All you need to do is head back to the Underworld version of the castle, which is currently under control of an insane Nephrak ghost who's protected by black pestilent blobs whose bodies contain all the bones of those who ever tried and failed to attack the castle. On the bright side, the map's still there. Note that this does not apply to all things, but if something was considered historically essential or passed down in tales, then I think it's worth checking out the Underworld for any ghostly backups that may exist. There are other secret benefits to the Underworld itself. If you have a beef with the Sidriels or the Realm, then the Underworld is a perfect place to lie low. Not only is it one of the last places anyone would ever look for you, but it becomes extremely difficult to find you in such a place. Sidriels are known as the cheating bastards of Exalted. Where Solar plays a flawless game, the Sidriel flips the entire damn table and is now playing a new game that he's winning. Following this methodology, Sidriels have an eerily scary tracking method for nearly anyone that exists in creation by using astrology to where you might be, or if they really want to be a thorn in the ass, using the Loom of Fate to find out where you could be in the future. If you're in creation, then trying to oppose this is a colossal pain in the ass. Typically, you need special charms, infrastructure, high-level connections in heaven, powerful artifacts, or other non-easily obtainable tricks to counter this. Or you can simply walk into the Underworld and laugh as the majority of Sidriel's tricks to find you suddenly flatline. No extra effort needed. If you need to do this, then the best a Sidriel can do against you is return a reading of Last Seen Heading into the Bayou of Tears at Midnight. A Sidriel may suspect that you're in the Underworld, but they won't have a solid location. This can be an important trick to keep in your back pocket, especially when said Sidriel has enough influence through his Dragon-blooded shadow proxies to call a Wyld Hunt. A Wyld Hunt could attempt to follow you into the Shadowland, but seeing how it's hostile to life, a majority won't bother. The logistics alone are too complicated. Even if you are an elemental superhuman, trying to do this is only going to end with the same results as when Napoleon and Hitler tried to invade Russia by Siberia. Spoilers, it didn't end well for them. Now picture those soldiers who die coming back to life and try to kill you in revenge for a horribly planned expedition. Yeah, again, there's reasons why the Underworld isn't friendly towards life. Valuable things also exist for mortal traders down in the Underworld. For those who brave the horrors, traveling along an ancient migration route used by a tribe could take you to a settlement where an herb, long since extinct in creation, could be used in wide ceremony use by ghosts of settlers past. The invaluable treasures of the spirits with lifetimes of knowledge could be the perfect teacher for an up-and-coming Twilight Exalt, while the vengeful ghosts of a population put to death by a tyrannical realm sitrap could be the ideal army to raise up and use against them. And out of everything in the world, the dead are the ones who are the best at throwing parties. Ever heard of Dia los Muertos, or the Day of the Dead in Mexico? It shows that the dead know how to throw their own damn parties. The bards themselves also make the best drinks. Want a drink that has a sweet, nutty aftertaste to it? Go ahead and add some arsenic. What's it going to do to ghosts that live there? Kill them? This isn't the most comprehensive view of the Underworld I could give. For example, I didn't even touch on things such as the Labyrinth or the Underworld calendar, but such things I feel are their own separate videos. Plus, this video is long enough as it is. Now that we've looked at the two cookies between our cream layer of creation, what exists outside of the cookie itself? It's important to remember that creation itself is kind of like a planet, but instead of a strict planet, is an island that floats on an infinite sea of chaos that is the Wyld. If creation is a ship, then the elemental poles serve as the anchors that keep it in place. There isn't a lot of material on the elemental poles themselves. In fact, the word count for any other realm described in official print dwarfs those of the elemental poles. Hell, I'm pretty sure the section of the elemental poles I'm talking about is probably going to exceed one of these sections of the elemental poles. But I'll go ahead and give it a stab anyways. The elemental poles are the anchors of creation, both physically and metaphysically. The elemental poles are raw, primordial expressions of elemental might, but they provide consistency within creation itself. It's thanks to them and the Loom of Fate that fire always has the behavior of fire, meaning that fire will always make things hot, rather than super cool them and leave behind charred remains instead of jello. Creation itself is actually the pole of Earth, its stability and static nature of Earth allowing those who live upon it to live their lives free from the sun mutations and causality changes that exist within the Wyld. The other poles are bolted to each to one of the four corners of creation itself, or directions rather. The north is air, the east is wood, the south is fire, and the west is water. They are also quite literally anchors of creation too, as they physically bolt the island of creation in place. Traveling to the elemental poles is rather straightforward. Just keep walking north, south, east, or west until you eventually run into them. But this is typically far easier said than done. As one travels closer and closer to the elemental poles themselves, their respective elements become stronger and stronger until it's nearly impossible for mortal life to survive. The bitterly cold air of the north becomes so cold that even lightning snap freezes in the cold weather. Rainstorms one experiences as they travel to the polar water become more and more severe until you're sailing not on the sea, but you're sailing in it. The temperatures near the pole of fire become hotter and hotter until eventually mortal bodies catch fire. If you play Breath of the Wild, then go into the Guaran area, and that's what the pole of fire is exactly like. Wood may symbolize life, but even there it's not safe. A small breather against a tree could have your hand rapidly covered and grown over by moss on the tree. The moss that grows non-stop until finally one is now covered in moss and only serves as nourishment for the tree itself. This, of course, is if one manages to avoid or find a safe way through the wild pockets that dot their way to the poles themselves. The native spirits of the elemental poles are, unsurprisingly, elementals. You won't see it mentioned in their official write-ups, but I believe it makes narrative sense that elementals would have no problem surviving in their corresponding elemental pole. A skyfolk, for example, doesn't explicitly have a power saying won't auto-die an elemental pole of air, but I suspect it's there at least. This is mainly because a great many elementals live within the elemental poles. A large collection of elemental energy in the area, making it easy for them to come into existence. In fact, the elemental dragons themselves call the elemental poles their home, the head honchos of the elements themselves. There may be gods representing elements, but the elemental dragons are the elements. Traveling to the elemental poles is typically only done under extraordinary circumstances. As previously mentioned, the raw elemental manifestations usually make it inhospitable to most known forms of life. Even the Exalted themselves will often need specialized charms or equipment to survive in such places. Most mortal traders don't even head to such an area, the lucky ones relying on proxies to travel to the poles for them. The main reason to head there would be to gather exotic materials or certain elementals, as there would be no shortage of either in the poles. It could also be another place to lie low, but often the trouble needed to get there and back, and the difficulties surviving, make the Underworld or Malfeas more attractive and even safer choices. If you're reaching, you could even say that the Circle Mate's previous incarnation had an office such location, one that would detail the location of treasures collected over 2,000 years of conquest. I'd like to still imagine there are some forms of mortal life in the area, just as a way to spice things up. Within the endless depths of the Western Pole could exist a society of merfolk who occasionally visit sailors who end up lost in their floating bubble village, or inside the belly of a great beast. Winged humanoid mortals could exist within the infinite winds of the Pole of Air, living on an island that is constantly struck by lightning to both heat and light their landmass home, or other such fantastical details. Now with that proper segue, let's jump into the Wyld next. Oh boy, the Wyld. The Wyld is a home to many things both strange and beautiful, including but not limited to the Fae. It exists as a vast, infinite expanse of chaos that surrounds creation and laps at it like an ocean. When I mean chaos, I literally mean chaos in its purest sense. If I had to sum up the Wyld in 2 words, it would be chaos and potential. The Wyld is unique as it can literally be anything it wants to be. It's never static, constantly shifting from one form to the next in a seamless fashion. The Wyld is one of the 2 most lethal locales in all of Exalted, rivaled only by the elemental poles themselves. The Wyld is a twisted and cruel mistress, where if its lethal traps fail to kill you, or its wondrous beauty fails to captivate you, then you may find yourself boiled down to nothing less than a living narrative. Now don't worry, confusion is a completely normal reaction to learning what the Wyld is for the first time in Exalted. I'll try my best to explain and break it down for you. Just throughout the entire part of this, keep in mind the purviews of chaos, narrative, and potential in mind, as it plays heavily within each theme of the Wyld. This is because, more than anything else, the Wyld wants to craft a story or narrative for each of the things that dwells within it. The Wyld doesn't want you to ever leave. It will make up ways for you to remain behind. In this sense, it's almost as a living being or a storyteller itself, not directly forcing others to do its bidding, but providing challenges to see if one can overcome them. The most noticeable side effect of the Wyld itself is physical mutations. Staying inside or near the Wyld itself has a side effect of gaining spontaneous mutations. Sometimes these mutations are harmless and benign, such as new color hair or reverse joints. Other times they're beneficial, such as your body gaining a portable beehive or eyes that let you see in the dark. Most often, however, they're a pain in the ass, such as swapping genders when cold waters pour in your head, your mouth disappearing and now needing to eat foods by smelling them instead, or your feet turning into roots and want to permanently anchor you to the ground so they may grow into a tree. Such mutations can happen at random, but typically I like to think they follow a trend of being related to one's own specific story itself. For example, eating by smell could happen if you try to find food but are having difficulty by doing so. Gaining the wings of a bird could happen if you want to pursue a quest relating to freedom. A slick businessman could find his lower body turned into a snake. A kidnapped maiden could find herself with skin of gold if the tribe that kidnapped her finds her valuable. Or barbaric tribes that exist on the fringes of creation could find their outer forms as ugly as their inner ones, as they grow misshapen masses of muscle or extra arms. Each of these are either direct consequences or metaphors of the current situation that the person finds themselves in, and the Wyld is just making them a physical reality. Or if you want to go ahead and have a laugh, break out the Dark Heresy mutation table. Fun times for the entire family. More subtle than the physical mutations are the mental mutations. The Wyld is capable of warping all things, including one's own mind if they are careless. Strange addictions or compulsions to questionable behavior can happen if one is not careful. As before, I believe the Wyld will attempt to enforce certain narratives or themes of behavior on its poor victims. The snake merchant, for example, can be slapped with a compulsion to gather more and more money. Not for the sake of doing other business, but just for the purpose of money itself, because that's what the Wyld thinks a businessman does. Just gets money. All of these things will add up over time to a person, the Wyld slowly corrupting them piece by piece. If a noble hero attempts to enter the Wyld, then after several ventures, he could find his mind being slowly stripped away of any unnecessary complexities and himself being slowly corroded away. Any depth the noble hero once had is subtly and quietly filed away until he's nothing more than a cookie-cutter lawful good paladin or Saturday morning cartoon character. If a heroic pirate captain ventures forth in the Wyld and begins fighting pirates and mutants, he could very well find the Wyld setting up grander and grander encounters. Pretty soon, all complexities his character he may have had are now gone, as he solely exists to fight other pirates and mutants. This could also happen with physical mutations as well, becoming slowly more and more adapted to a new and specialized environment. Once this happens, then a person is assimilated into the Wyld. They effectively cease being a person and instead just become another tale that exists in the Wyld. It's impossible to save them after this too, as creation is no longer to their taste. Everything is less vivid and so dull in comparison. In fact, trying to force a Wyld assimilated person to remain in creation is bad for their health. Even if special circumstances are met to try and accompany them, and there are any unique biological changes, their essence is that of the Wyld rather than creation. So such people will die over time, like a fish slowly choking on air. Or more accurately, a whale. Severely Wyld corrupted folk can still enter creation, just not permanently. Now the Wyld exists in specific severities across creation. A border marsh is an area that's just on the border of creation in the Wyld. Such areas still embody the same general rules and principles of creation itself. Trees will grow and animals need food to survive, but doing such things generally isn't advisable, as you may bite into your fresh tomato to only find out it's been crossbred with tobacco, creating tomacos. These are often not only found at the edge of creation, but even within creation itself. Such areas of these are where the Loom of Fate had minor fate glitches, allowing the Wyld to seep in like a leak on a ship. Such spots provide valuable safe havens for Rockshaw who do live and travel within creation. Such spots may slowly become worse over time, reality becoming thinner and thinner as stranger laws and physics take over. Wild crabbits may be seen hopping across the land, while lawyers who live inside speak honest truths. Eventually, a total reality breakdown will occur, following the same nonsensical laws and is dangerous as the deep wild itself. Such areas are marked as a danger zone for nearly every non-Fae organization within creation. Such places are typically labeled for correction by Sidriels, and will attempt to repair the significant leak within creation's boat before it spreads even further. The possibilities of such rewards are incredible, so quite often you see no shortage of people heading into the wild. Fae courts handsomely reward traders who bring them captive slaves to devour, with strange and alien ingredients that only a world with looser laws on reality may permit. Wheels made entirely out of hands give wagons true all-wheel drive, or the pride of a general who has won 1,000 battles. No, I don't mean the feelings or memories of such a general, an actual metaphysical representation of the general's pride. In fact, you can do other things in the wild, such as Fae pulling out one of your greatest fears in a dog, so you may drown that dog and never be afraid of that thing again. Alright, look, I know it's confusing. We'll be touching more on it later when we cover the Fae directly. Who are the native inhabitants of the wild? The Raksha, also known as the Fae, are the ones who most commonly call such a place home. Indeed, their very nature allows them to be immune to the ravages of the wild, walking through even the most chaotic and shifting landscape as if it were a sunny open field. At least an effort. A Fae crossing a bottomless chasm of teeth may look like they're putting great effort into it, but that's all part of the narrative of... Okay, look, I know the face you're making now. I may not see it, but I know what it is. When it comes to the Fae or Wyld and Exalted, then trust me, asking what the fuck is going on every now and again is a common occurrence. Even veterans of the game itself are thrown for loops. But the Fae are not the only things that call the wild home. Incredibly powerful monsters known as behemoths are known to wander out of the wild time to time and into creation, ranging from something like a good starter challenge to beginning Exalted group to, oh shit, where the fuck is my War Strider, let's make an alliance with my most dire enemies to beat this damn thing. These things have literally no rhyme or reason and serve as a blank check to let storytellers make up whatever their drug-fueled fantasy minds want them to do. And in the end, that's what the wild is. Whatever you want. I have a phrase for some Exalted scenarios. It came from the wild! This means that you can make up essentially almost whatever fantasy thing you want. Beholders, displacer beasts, tentacle monsters, Godzilla, entire empires, a brand new species of creatures seeking to expand, anything. If there is something in Exalted that doesn't exist, then the wild will let you birth it into life with no other reasoning beyond, it came from the wild! It's the same as saying a wizard did it in Dungeons & Dragons. Leaping from one strange realm to another, we'll jump into the peculiar demonic realm of Malfeas next. A strange, exotic, and alien place that is both called Hell and the home of infinite losers. That is because the land of demons themselves were once creation's ruling elite, defeated by the Exalted and not only banished forever from its lands, but having the emperor that led them for all demonkind turned inside out to serve as their eternal prison, doomed forever to be the slaves and servants of those they once ruled over. See, the home of infinite losers fits perfectly here. The structure of Malfeas is unique. It's broken up into a set of undetermined layers or levels of hell, the number and size of these layers being roughly determined as plot. Looking up doesn't let you see the other layers, but rather a brilliant green sun shining in the demonic sky itself, shining through all obstructions in its path except for the shadow of the Ebon Dragon itself. Each of these layers contains whatever the storyteller wants, but are almost undoubtedly strange and alien in appearance. Cities of brass where residents continuously dance to the ever-present beat of music. Shimmering silver trees which reflect all possible versions of oneself, both past and future. Deserts and mountains that stretch out to infinity, and other queer landscapes. Each of these landscapes is made either by its demonic residents or any Yozi that happens to pass by. The wild and Malfeas could be described as alien and chaotic, but the key difference between them is that the wild tries to craft a narrative, The Malfean layers are bent to the will of the current layer's demons ruling, or the Yozis themselves. This exciting version of Hell just goes to show you how its original creator Jenner had far better drugs than the rest of us mere mortals. To understand Malfeas, one needs to understand demons, as layers in Malfeas are directly tied to whatever powerful demon rules the lands, and whatever their whims may be. Their rule is near absolute, as the law of Cecilene forbids those weaker than the rulers to submit. Plus, the majority of them stand little chance in Hell of opposing such leaders anyway. So these demons spend their time in Malfeas, partying, talking, dancing, fucking, cleaning their bristles, the same thing us normal mortal folk do in creation. Or at least many of them do. If one has thoughts about escaping, then most demons had better think again. Hell itself is designed to be unbreakable. No loophole exists where the fallen defeated titans of creation, the Yozis, may use to escape. They are forever doomed to languish in this prison made from the brass bones of their leader. But this prison isn't completely perfect. Time to time, demonic residents of Malfeas are known to break out in particular circumstances that go just beyond your typical demonic cult summoning them. Whenever a husband kills his spouse for cheating on him in a blind rage, a demon may escape from hell. When one climbs the tallest mountain in the lands to shout to the heavens for a worthy challenge, a demonic warrior general steps forth from hell to answer his call. When an infamously wealthy merchant dominates all of his political and economic rivals in not one but several countries, a mighty prince of hell might congratulate him in his dreams before making an offer too tempting to refuse. All of these are possible as well as a large fishnet of the Yozis keep them inside the prison and stop them when they try to escape. The smaller souls of demons are simply able to squeeze on through. The weaker the demon, the easier it is for them to enter creation. In terms of its physical location relative to creation, Malfeas isn't above or below it. Instead, it exists somewhere off to the side, as an easily accessible alternate dimension of sorts. Getting to Malfeas may be hard in some areas, but can be easily done in the north or south. If one travels for 7 days across the desert landscape without visiting any places of civilization, such as towns or settlements, they will find on the 7th day that the stars in the night sky will turn green, and that white sand or snow will slowly switch to a silver color. If you keep journeying from this, the next morning you'll wind up in the infinite desert of Cecilene that exists within the layers of Malfeas itself. Now, I should mention that the air of Malfeas was poisonous to mortals back in the 2nd edition of Exalted, but this feature is likely going to die out in the 3rd edition, because quite frankly, it was garbage to begin with. So, in theory, while mortals can live inside Malfeas, they're going to find it very difficult. This is because Malfeas is a place made for its demonic inhabitants first and foremost. Mortals don't even enter the equation. This, of course, is if you can avoid being torn limb by limb by a bored blood ape that just happens to pass on by. If there is a word I would use to describe Malfeas, it would be just simply different. Hell in Exalted isn't the place where bad, evil people go after they die, or a horrific hellscape full of creatures that are universally evil and want to do nothing more than conquer and corrupt the universe. I mean, it does have some demons who want to do that, yes, but all in all, Malfeas and the demons living within it are just different. They're living beings that simply try to eke out a living as best they can, just with some rather interesting behavior or characteristics. If you need good inspiration for the myths and lore of Hell, I'd recommend checking out the many sources of Indian folklore, as I feel the mythology does feel very strange for at least a great many Westerners. If you're really looking to go deep, then I recommend checking out the divine comedy Dante's Inferno. More than just a jab at the Christian church, Dante's Inferno outlines a single man's trip through a cursed and strange land. Yes, it is a version of hell that where dead people go to, but it goes beyond the mere fire and brimstone that many tropes paint as hell. Dante's Inferno explores swamps full of bile and feces of people that are endlessly cursed to roam through, whirlwinds of lust, forests of despair, and more. It's a strange and terrifying world, which I feel is unique. You can go ahead and check out the original resource, or you can read a manga version of it down below. The manga version isn't what you think. Rather, it's a faithful retelling of Hell done by Go Nagi of the Devilman and Super robot fame. Alternatively, you can check out the video game of Dante's Inferno down below, which takes certain liberties with the source material, to put it lightly. But I'll be damned if it isn't pretty. Kind of fun, actually. To the surprise of no one, demons are the native inhabitants of Malfeas itself. There's minimal cross-contamination of other spirits in the area. Gods typically avoid this place like a plague. The only one staying down here deliberately is the Yu-Shan ambassador himself. Elementals from creation don't come down here, as Malfeas tends to pride itself on different sorts of elements. Instead of water elementals, there could be elementals composed completely of vitriol or acid. Ghosts, I say, are not an impossibility in hell, but are an extreme irregularity. The essence of Malfeas isn't normally tolerated by ghosts, and usually those from the Underworld do not have much business with Malfeas itself. But if a ghost of a vengeful mortal rises up in hell with the sole purpose of terrifying demons, then I can definitely see such a thing happening. Fae are also a rarity in Malfeas, and again would only go there if they have extremely important business. This is because the Yozis who rule hell and the Raksha are enemies older than the gods themselves. Raksha can try to pull their shenanigans here, but Ajorn, for example, loves Fae, and Ajorn enjoys causing pain and death upon those she loves. For this reason, Raksha are ill-advised to travel to Malfeas unless they have some sort of exceptional circumstance in doing so. This may seem bland with only one type of spirit being in the area, but trust me, there are so many types of demons that this does not matter. For nearly any kind of role or purpose, you could find a demon that does it. Hell, the game actively encourages you to make lore rolls to declare whenever a demon for a certain task exists or not. So if you want a demon to clean your toilets, then I'm pretty sure there's a filth eater with a long tongue who'd be glad to do it for you. The last realm is what I'd regard as a special and most unique realm within the Exalted vanilla setting. Autochthonia, the realm of brass and shadow. If I mispronounced that, then my apologies. Autochthonia itself is dramatically different from Exalted itself. Many people not liking it due to how badly it clashes with the Bronze Age or Sword and Sandals theme of the default setting. Thankfully, for those people who are allergic to cool things, Autochthonia is only accessible by plot fiat. So if the realm I'm explaining seems too far out there for the default setting you came to Exalted for, just keep that detail in mind. So let's dig into this. Autochthonia is a mechanical realm, a world filled with mechanical blessings and horrors in equal measure. To get a mental picture of Autochthonia, picture something the size of the second Death Star, a mechanical god engine that serves as a beating heart for one of the last free and untethered primordials known as Autochthon. The primordial whose purviews include tools of all sorts, advancement, and industry. Long ago in creation, millions of people were abruptly taken and placed inside this god engine, shortly before Autochthon left creation without so long and thanks for all the fish note. These people quickly realized they now lived in a realm where human habitation wasn't so much of a thought, let alone an afterthought. A cold and lightless world full of metallic passageways that could abruptly cut into a trash compactor or metallic trash that could easily puncture your average human like a pincushion. To this end, Autochthon himself made the Alchemicals Exalted to serve as champions of humanity before heading into a slumber. One day hoping to reawaken in the future where everything would be nice, neat, orderly, and hopefully much better. Spoilers, it didn't turn out remotely that way. This is an overly quick and simplified version of Autochthonia itself, which if you want to learn more, I'd recommend that you check out the 2nd edition Autochthonia Compass, made and written by the same people who wrote the 3rd edition core. But before going forward, we're going to need to know the very basics of how Autochthonia is different from creation before we start getting into the metaphysical differences. The crucial difference is that nature in Autochthonia isn't what we think of in our world of creation. Instead, these people inside of Autochthonia call nature itself the vast, unexplored metal waste beyond the safety of their metropolis or petropolis home cities. Autochthonia is home to spirits just as creation is. Gods are alive and well in the realm of brass and shadow, and primarily fill the same purpose, managing various aspects of both the creator, both physical and metaphysical. Spirits in Autochthonia are more autonomous than the Creation Brethren, but still have the standard reporting structure. Rather than ending in Yu-Shan, the final authority in Autochthonia rests with the Divine Ministers in a diamond city within the Pole Crystal, considered to be the brain and center of Autochthon itself. Potent spirits known as Destroyers also exist within this realm. Spiritual manifestations of ancient weapons made by Autochthon long ago. Loosely inspired by... directly inspired by Native American myths or Tsukumogami from Japan. Elementals are also dramatically different in Autochthonia. They still follow all the same metaphysical laws as their creation-based cousins, but Autochthonian elementals are based on industrial elements rather than traditional elements. So instead of elements such as wood and earth, Autochthonia elements use metal, steam, smoke, crystal, and oil as their base elements. Like creation, these elements all have their own corresponding poles, but rather than anchor creation to the wild, they serve to regulate Autochthon's own internal systems. The location of these poles are also indeterminate, as Autochthon itself is an immense landmass that's in constant shift. Maps showing a location to a pole from a century or even several decades ago could be wildly inaccurate. The only pole that remains a static position is the pole crystal itself. Other spirits within Autochthonia are also far more limited. Ghosts are typically seen as an aberration of the natural order, which, when things are past their prime, they should be recycled. Aside from the problems that typically come with hungry ghosts eating people, this also causes problems in Autochthonia, as the number of human souls within the realm is finite. Unlike creation itself, Autochthonia cannot make human souls, meaning that every single nation does their best to try to track multiple souls across multiple reincarnations, and ghosts who refuse to be reincarnated into new people are an annoying stopping block. Demons themselves are myths and legends spoken in Autochthonia's lore, known as the Breakers. Wicked beings who sought to break Autochthon's own inventions through deliberate action or misuse. It is noted that due to the 5-metal seal, which we'll discuss shortly, no other ways into this realm are possible even by accident. This means one cannot enter Malfeas through the deserts of Cecilene, nor can they create a Shadowland. Such actions typically create what is known as Autochthonia as the Void, which goes beyond the scope of what this video is discussing. But if you want a crash course, watch the movie Virus for a pretty much exact example of how terrifying the things that crawl out from the void actually are. Now this sounds like a completely different setting than base Exalted, and it is. The original creators of Exalted knew this. In fact, when Alchemicals and the setting of Autochthonia were first mentioned in a small section in Scavenger Sons back in the first edition, people didn't feel the Alchemicals meshed with the setting of Exalted. It was as if space aliens suddenly dropped down in the middle of a Dungeons & Dragons game. Which, I find such things awesome, a lot of people do not. To solve this issue, the realm of Autochthonia is protected by a metaphysical seal called the Great Hawkeye Bear, the 5-metal seal. So long as the seal is intact, it is impossible to access Autochthonia from the side of creation. But it's much easier for those on the Autochthonian side to break it. In game terms, this means that unless a storyteller wants to involve Autochthonia, they literally never have to. They have a valid in-game reason to make sure it never happens, or only happens when they want. This can be mainly done to keep a game to a certain style, as once Autochthonia is involved, the overall setting can change quite massively as another major power player suddenly enters the picture with dramatically different technology. Usually, I wouldn't even mention this, but seeing as some people suddenly jump to conclusions, or seemingly afraid to tell their players we will never be using this point or area, I felt the need to address this. If you want to play as Alchemicals, the mortal champions with hearts of steel from Autochthonia itself, then you are unfortunately stuck in the second edition, as only a complete idiot with too much time on his hands would bother making a conversion. So naturally I made one. One with over a total of 1,000 charms and upgrades. Links down below in the description. Accessing the realm itself also isn't 100% impossible from the creation side of things if your storyteller is actually up for it. Maybe there was some group in creation who was supposed to be responsible for notifying Autochthon that he may return, but died out in the Great Contagion. Or maybe your players can pull the ultimate risk and barter with the Neverborn and risk oblivion to enter the realm. Or maybe the Autochtthonians suddenly appear out of the blue as natural game progression. Again, this is all up to the storyteller. If the rest of the group or storyteller doesn't feel up to such a thing, then don't annoy them by constantly pressing the issue. As with Malfeas, I've barely scratched the surface of Autochthonia, and instead only the barest of the bare essentials. Discussing it in detail would have to be a video or series of videos for another time. That took a lot longer than I thought it was going to be. But on the bright side, we now have a better idea of how each of these divine realms operate, what they're like, and this is important to understand the homes of those who dwell within them. Now we get to the core of the question, one that's likely been on your mind for nearly 2.5 months. How do these spirits work? What makes them tick? Part 3. Spirits and their unique metaphysics. Now, thanks to the magic of poor editing and this being a first draft of the script, we've already briefly touched upon each type of spirit along with some vague hints on what they are like. So let's begin with some of the more common universal traits that most spirits possess. Now, I will place a big warning ahead of time that each of these traits ultimately depends on the type of spirit itself. For some of these spirits, these common universal traits may work differently. In other spirits, they may not work at all. While in some realms, these metaphysics can change the properties of how the spirits work. However, it is typically easier to list out the exceptions when they do happen. So if such things are different, I'll mention them in the entry regarding that spirit type. Now, what is the definition of a spirit in Exalted? If I had to make up one without looking at the book, it would be a being whose body is primarily composed of essence or energy. Typically, in their native state, spirits are immaterial. While immaterial, spirits still exist, but in an ethereal, ghostly form. They cannot be sensed by any of the 5 senses with any degree of accuracy or reliability, nor have any effect on the world, barring special powers or narrative effects. What this means is that dematerialized spirits can trivially pass through most physical barriers, such as doors, as if they didn't even exist. While this form renders a spirit largely immune from harm from most known sources, it does come with the drawback that a spirit cannot exert any change on the world at large. To affect the physical world, the spirit can choose to materialize, making a shell body for itself out of its own internal resource pool of motes. Once a spirit does this, they now have a body they can use to interact with the world at large, and, barring any special magical powers, the spirits can be sensed and interact with, as if they were anything else tangible or physical. This essence shell also gives a spirit a high degree of innate supernatural toughness, mainly because this shell is not a spirit's actual body. Even if you use your patented melee death combo and slice a spirit into 10,000 tiny ribbons, then the chances are they're still alive. This is because you only destroyed a shell of a spirit rather than its actual body, which is ejected from the shell when it's destroyed. Now, this isn't to say that a spirit doesn't feel anything when they're destroyed by this. In fact, it's a very uncomfortable feeling for them, akin to being kicked in the nuts for most men. For lady folk watching this that have no idea what that feels like, think of a very sharp and incredibly tense pain followed by residual aches for up to an hour after. It's not a feeling anyone would willingly enjoy. Except for a very select group of people. The shock is so much that spirits are almost always rendered unconscious by this, and are barred from being able to make a material body again until a certain duration has passed. The time varies depending on a great many factors such as type of spirit, their essence, and other details, but if you need a good rule of thumb, then use the amount of time it takes for them to heal past the incapacitated health level. More or less depending on how much the cult, prayers, or tributes, or maybe a mentor would help out there as well. To permanently destroy a spirit, special effort is required. The exact details of this depends on the spirit in question, as each one has its own rules regarding permanent death. The one near universal way, however, are soul destruction charms, such as Ghost Eating Technique, or often called GET, G-E-T, in a shorthand form. Using Ghost Eating Technique on a spirit when their incapacitated box is filled, instantly and permanently kills them. There is no chance for reincarnation, resurrection, going past go and collecting $200, or any other way back in most circumstances. Their soul and essence are effectively pushed through a metaphysical paper shredder and are permanently destroyed. For those eagle-eyed out there, any charm that says destroys the soul of the opponent as part of its effect usually means that Ghost Eating Technique's spirit destruction is part of that effect, meaning that it has the same effect as using Ghost Eating Technique when you knock out a spirit. Of course, this is only the most direct method. Most spirits, as in the vast majority, have some way of permanently dying if some form or condition is met. This is to help out those who don't have Ghost Eating Technique to avoid getting hazed by spirits. This method may not be easy, or it may be a jealously guarded secret only known by the spirit themselves, but the chances are that it does exist. So think of getting Ghost Eating Technique as a fast pass for destroying spirits, letting you kill them without going through annoying hoops. In some cases, such as the Death Lords, using Ghost Eating Technique will only delay the amount of time needed for those spirits to return instead of permanently killing them. I will note that this is the one extreme exception to the charm Ghost Eating Technique, and it only should be treated as an exception rather than a norm. As in, I'd only let the big bad evil guy of my game have such a power, or someone whose power supports such a narrative justification. Perhaps someone who proclaims himself as the Queen of the Garter Birds, for example. Someone whose own massive life force or very strong connections to the legendary Phoenix could very well let them justify such a thing in the first place. Also, as a note, never roast garter birds. It only encourages them. Instead, use a frozen lightning glaze. It provides a minty fresh flavor that tingles the mouth and goes great with a salad. Now, spirits themselves have access to several common charms that I've seen across most, but not all types of spirits. This is starting to become a catchphrase for this video. Principle of Motion, or POM, P-O-M for shorthand forms, allows a spirit to act with great speed, allowing them to take 2 actions at once without penalty. In combat, this can be used to great effects, such as making 2 attacks, but clever spirits and storytellers can find uses for this. If you're playing the 2nd edition, then many Eclipse cast players may try to access this charm. The game breaks when Exalts get access to this charm, so keep that in mind when deciding. Sense the Wind allows the spirit to sense the nature of another supernatural nearby, and whether or not that person possesses some sort of means to permanently kill them. The exact accuracy of this charm depends on the spirit type in general, and some type of spirits may have a stronger version of this charm than others, but at base level, it will tell the nature of the opponent. A god can sense that a person in front of him is another god, an elemental, a ghost, or some sort of exalt. More importantly, this charm tells spirits whenever the person they're talking to has some means of permanently killing them by some sort of soul destruction magic. This isn't like Dragon Ball Z, I sense his power level across vast distances charm, but with upgrades, it could very well be. To make surprises work, this charm usually fails or requires a roll-off against supernatural or magical-based disguises. After all, it's no fun to impersonate a god if any sort of spirit can trivially see through a disguise without much of a contest. Dematerialize and materialize are the charms that allows a spirit to dematerialize and rematerialize in the world. Dematerializing typically doesn't cost a spirit much resources, but materializing often requires an immense amount of resources, usually half of the spirit's entire mote pool. So going through the walls of an unexpected player's room to have a demon materialize and attack the player in there is a valid tactic. The spirit will be at a disadvantage as nearly half of his mote pool and resources were used to materialize. Stopping this tactic usually involves setting some wards up, which in 3rd edition are somewhat poorly defined, but can be set up as a quick and impromptu sorcerer's ritual. If you're just staying at a hotel or a campsite for a night, then I just make a single roll that takes anywhere between 15 minutes for an hour to repair. Spirits need to make an Essence plus Integrity roll to see if they can break through the wards while dematerialize at a difficulty equal to the excess successes of the ritual. Yes, sorcerer's rituals have experience point costs, but those experience point costs are returned once the ritual serves no more use, meaning you'll get your experience points back the next morning. Larger structures, such as castles, could have permanent warded rooms or grounds set up around them, but often involve a more proper setup and maintenance to make sure such wards remain intact. And as a minor point, I do kind of miss the wards from 2nd edition. You can get up with so much cheesy things with those things. It was great. Now, it is possible for some spirits to lack dematerialize or rematerialize, in which such case spirits are permanently in one form. A spirit without materialize is naturally immaterial, while spirits without immaterialize are naturally material. As a note, Eclipse Cast Solars could learn these charms to 2nd edition, and they are exactly as broken as they sound. You do not know hell until you face an Eclipse or an Inferno who's dematerialized yet can still lift a physical sword with psychokinetic powers and attack you. Hurry Home is the last of the most common types of spirit charms. Using it allows the spirit to instantly and immediately head back to a certain point labeled as home. For demons, this could be next to their summoner's side, while for a river god, it could be next to a small shrine dedicated to him. Some lucky spirits can set their point wherever they please. Either way, it always ensures the spirit is never far from a place they deem important. Actually sensing if something goes wrong with your home is a completely different charm, one that's only semi-common rather than being on the vast majority of spirits. This can give a spirit who fights in a war an enormous advantage, as at the first sign of serious trouble, they can just use Hurry Home, recover in safety, then head back to the front lines when ready. It typically can't be used as a method of teleporting around everywhere they want, as this charm usually only works with one specific point at a time. As a unique note, spirits often have an inbuilt effect of this charm whenever their shell body is destroyed, even if they don't know it. This means that unless a person in the party who physically knows Ghost Eating Technique is the one who lands the killing blow, then the spirit is likely to escape. There are ways around this. For example, knocking a spirit unconscious could still force their body to remain material, but think of it as fostering close ties of teamwork in battle, or giving the Distract Gambit a reason to exist. Alternatively, you could ward off a spirit's home, which in this case, the spirit doesn't go anywhere if the shell body is hacked to bits. The Ghost Eating Technique user, in this case, can just waltz on up and poke the dematerialized god to kill them. So with the basic traits out of the way, let's stop procrastinating and begin discussing the different types of spirits. I may be repeating myself for some of the things said in previous videos, or hell even this video, but I think it's better to repeat than to constantly have to flip back and forth between videos constantly. Gods are the de facto or the most conventional type of spirit in Exalted. When people talk about spirits in Exalted, the chances are they're talking about a god unless specified otherwise. As mentioned previously in this video and a 3rd edition core book, gods are the caretakers of the world. They look over the purviews of the world and make sure they're functioning correctly, ranging from physical things such as a direction to looser concepts such as seasons or music. A god's purview directs the scope of his powers, whether cult size, essence level, spiritual patrons, or rank direct how personally powerful such charms are or magic will be. To be clearer, the goddess of music is going to have a stronger set of charms than the god of rock music, but the god of rock music is going to have a wider purview of effects than a regional jazz or music god who only specializes in one specific type of music, or locale of music, or a god of neo-Nordic Viking metal with gothic overtones. The regional or specialized god might have one or two tricks up their sleeve, given their incredible specialization of their niche, but overall the higher up gods are going to have broader and more encompassing powers that not only work within their specific area, but many more areas as well. A very loose example of this I can give off the top of my head is that the god of neo-Nordic Viking metal with gothic overtones can probably double 9s on any music related to neo-Nordic Viking metal with gothic overtones. But the goddess of music, however, can double 9s flat on all sorts of music. Now, can a god exist without a purview? Absolutely. If a city god takes a picnic on a serene hillside and a vengeful Exalt annihilates their entire city in the meantime, then that god is still fine. Horrified, but still fine. What happens after that is far less pleasant for the god in question, as the god becomes both vulnerable and weaker as time goes on. A god's purview is the source of a god's power, and without it, a god's power slowly wanes. The god will never die from this, and in all likelihood still have powers far beyond a mortal man, but they'd only be a pale shadow of their former selves. If a god becomes too weak, then it's entirely possible for them to die when you destroy their corporeal shell body. Especially if that god doesn't have any divine patrons, sanctums, cults, or some other rare emergency plan. And if you're a jobless god, then chances are you're probably not going to have any of those things, except for a really nice divine patron, whom you probably owe many favors to. To ageless beings who reform after death, the concept of true death is something that utterly terrifies them. This is why gods are so leery of people who possess some sort of soul destruction magic. Note that this drain of power doesn't happen all at once, but is a slow and steady process, at least something that I'd imagine. A city god who lost his city might be able to still use some of his powers on neighboring or similar cities, but over time those powers will fade. A god might still have one or two general charms that allow him to do a trick or two in a city, but it'll be a far cry from even the weakest of city gods. For gods, this serves as a humiliation, and are typically regarded as lower class citizens amongst other gods, as they're seen as bums without a job. Unless you're the god of Neatery. Particularly mighty and powerful gods might see such a thing worse than death, and will do anything they can to make sure their purview is upheld. A god typically has a divine home called a sanctum. A sanctum in creation is typically a micro-pocket dimension where a god can rest and reside. It's usually decorated with whatever the god might find important, or has a desk for the most sensitive work. And by sensitive work, I mean writing reports. Can you imagine how fucking dull it must be to write the report of a river for year after year, for centuries at a time? No wonder gods try to do something to alleviate their boredom all the time. Now, a sanctum itself is normally pretty secure, often requiring one to be dematerialized to actually enter it, or possess some sort of special magic to let one in regardless of that. Or sometimes, usually, it's just very well hidden. Or all the above. Sanctums in creation, however, are directly tied to some sort of physical location. A river god might use a cave or a shrine as their sanctum, while a city god could have his office inside of a main city hall, capable of opening any door inside of there in order to step into their sanctum. Even gods of non-tangential purviews, such as regional folk music, will have some sort of shrine or appropriate landmark to serve as their sanctum. Destroying these things in question would typically destroy the god's own sanctum, so often it's in a god's best interest to keep their sanctum safe. Some gods may protect such shrines with powerful warrior cults or followers. Others may rely on secrecy, requiring one to tear down an entire area just to find it. Now, if a sanctum cannot be destroyed on the outside for whatever reason, then going inside the sanctum and destroying it in there will also serve just as well, and comes with the upside of leaving whatever the sanctum is tied to relatively intact. The city god may be able to access the sanctum from any door inside of a city hall, so rather than leveling the entire city hall, you might find it easier to use a sorcery equivalent of a crowbar to rip open their sanctum and trash the place. There might be exceptions to this, such as destroying a sanctum of a mountain god suddenly causing a landslide, but these are often exceptions rather than the norm. Sanctums in Yu-Shan follow the rules a bit differently. Rather than existing in a metaphysical pocket, these actually physically exist within Yu-Shan itself. Such places are often far more secure against physical attacks, as heaven is home to a lot of powerful creatures and a very strong army. So strong that all but the most min-maxed of Exalted will be worn down eventually. However, with how easily they're found and how easy they are to access, meaning that you don't need to be dematerialized, spies and thieves are even more of a problem. It's a trade-off, but most gods will want a sanctum in Yu-Shan, as it is a far better life insurance plan for the gods. High-ranking celestial gods in Yu-Shan could move their sanctums outside of Yu-Shan, but such gods are often seen as nuts. Why would you leave a safe and gated community and willingly move into a ghetto infested with problems and, mortals? But aside from being a home and a place of solitude, a sanctum serves as one of the main methods for gods to resurrect themselves. Whenever a god's physical shell is destroyed, they will immediately be spirited back to their sanctum and begin the process of reforming their physical body, taking the same amount of time it takes for one to recover past their incapacitated health level. During this time, gods are at their most vulnerable. The only protection a god has in this state is the sanctum's own immaterial nature. If the sanctum is somehow destroyed before the gods can reform themselves, then that god is dead, for real this time. If the god doesn't have a sanctum, then they'll die even after their corporeal body is destroyed. This is the main and most important reason gods have a sanctum. There are other ways for gods to come back to life, one of them being their own cults. If a god has a particularly faithful cult, then instead of a sanctum, they use the power of the cult to slowly will back the god's essence back in the shape. Like with a sanctum, I'd imagine this is a delicate process, almost like a surgeon possessing the skills needed to carve open someone's body, poke their internal squishy bits, then close them back up and have the person be better off rather than worse off. Destroying the cult could halt the god's resurrection process and have them die. Or alternatively, just stab the dematerialized and unconscious spirit god in his sleep with ghost-eating technique. Other powerful gods can also serve as a patron to lesser or weaker gods. It is not uncommon for weaker gods, or those without purview, to toady up to a more powerful and influential god in hopes of a promotion. It also comes with a comprehensive benefits plan, allowing their divine patron to spare up some power to bring a god back to health. This could be the lesser god borrowing their superior sanctum, or their cult to come back if the storytellers can find more mystical and intriguing means of gods being gods, then go for it. As long as it takes relatively the same amount of time as other methods, then nothing will break. The only thing this plan doesn't come with is dental, except if you serve under Sakal for some reason. She may be a bitch to her enemies and terrorize her employees, but on the bright side she has dental. Now, in terms of how gods are made, it varies. Gods can be made between two deities who love each other and have a child the traditional way, but there also may be such things as sorcery, crafting them into being, god-blooded who eventually shed their mortal bodies as they ascend to true godhood, mighty spirits making a brand new god out of mortal, or whatever else tickles your fancy. If you read some of the ancient creation myths of gods in our world, you're going to find some quirky, odd, and some really fucked up tales about how they came to be. One of the examples I can think of is how Artemis was birthed, by laying to rest in Zeus's own calf, and Zeus cutting open his calf in order to give birth to Artemis when she was ready. Out of all the spirits, gods will have absolutely no shortage of possible or very interesting origin stories. Now, the most important thing to keep in mind about gods is that they're caretakers of their purviews, first and foremost. Their powers could very well and easily go beyond whatever currently printed stats exist for them, quite possibly having many more charms related to the care of their role. Effects that help undo wild corruption or undo supernatural curses are things that many of them more than likely possess, as such things are vital to ensure that their purviews are being properly and safely upheld. Their powers in an area may also be strong, but are never absolute. If you curse a village so that their soil may never again bear a certain type of crop, then that area's local harvest god shouldn't be able to snap his fingers and undo it immediately. Hell, not even the god of all harvests should be able to do such a thing. Rather, their powers give them a chance to oppose such a role, or undo the damage before it gets too severe. The stronger the god, the greater chance of success you'll be able to do with this. In fact, a dedicated lunar or even gifted dragon-blooded sorcerously cursing the land could be well beyond what most regional gods are equipped to deal with. Now, I think that should cover all the major points I had to make about gods. At least before I get several comments telling me how I missed something. Oh well, onward to the next spirit. Elementals are primordial manifestations of the elements that exist within the creation and all their associated purviews. And no, I don't mean the creators of the Exalted universe, I mean primal, raw power. A fire elemental could embody the destructive nature of fire, the seductive flame that lies within the hearts of men, or the spark of creativity. Elementals typically come into this world fully formed and with some general knowledge of the world itself, whenever this being the result of some shared mystical knowledge of the world or plot convenience is up for you to decide. Elementals are a bit less purpose-driven than gods, as they can more easily be an everyday Joe who pulls their 9 to 5 just like everyone else. They also serve important niches of creation, what I believe are both being the protectors and janitors of creation, or more accurately things related to their purview. And a purview in an elemental sense is a bit more like their territory. Elementals are a bit more concrete or area focused than gods. A god can be a god of an area, but elementals have a bit more of a stake as that's their homeland. They want to protect it because that's their home. So let's unpack this dense opening paragraph. As while gods and elementals may both be spirits, they are as different as apples and oranges when one looks under their hood. First up are elemental associations. Elementals are unlike gods, as their elemental associations are chosen at birth and are never changed after that. Elementals are not the god of something and have no luxury of swapping purviews, but rather, a fire duck will always remain a fire duck. So rather than purviews, each elemental typically embodies some sort of meaning or aspect regarding one of the 5 elements themselves. If you need examples of what these could be, open up the Dragonblooded book and have a look at the themes of each of their casts, as the same could be applied to the elementals themselves. Elementals are mostly closely tied to what aspects of the element they're supposed to represent. As a god, they may be able to do some general stuff related to the purview, but they won't be as powerful as someone specializing in that area. For example, Fire Duck igniting their hands and throwing bolts of fire isn't out of the question for them. Fire Ducks are more about the seductive and compassionate side of fire though. So in the end, they're still related to fire, therefore throwing fire shouldn't be hard. Making items, however, might be a bit harder for them. There is literally nothing stopping a fire duck from being the apprentice of a craftsman for learning how to craft, but they won't be as good as making blades compared to elementals whose heat represents the forge and spark of ingenuity, because the latter is likely going to have more magical effects related to crafting, either in number and potency. The fire duck is going to be lucky to develop some at all, probably after years of training, hard work, or both. You may notice that I used a plural there when talking about fire ducks. Elementals, unlike gods, are rarely one-off, singular, powerful entities. Instead, elementals exist in multiple different types. There are many fire ducks, cloud people, and so forth. Their personality and traits may differ individual to individual, just like humans, but as humans, there are typically not very many extreme differences between members of a similar species. Let's take myself for example. I'm going to be no different biologically, or not far off, from another guy just walking down the street. But our personalities, they're going to be completely different. There are certain traits elementals may have, such as the first impression I had that they're naughty, prideful, arrogant, but that's up to the storyteller to decide if they're established stereotypes of that individual elemental, or innate behavior that underpins the elemental of that specific type. In terms of being born, elementals have several ways of coming into the world. First is the way most humans make children, provided the elementals are at least compatible with one another. Second is that the elemental is born in creation, from the fluctuations of raw elemental energy. Usually, when great amounts of elemental energy appear within the poles of creation, wild demons, sorcery, or some other convenient plot location, elementals can simply form out of the raw energy of the world. Typically, they come fully formed with some basic knowledge of the world to go along with it. New elementals may be intelligent, but they typically lack agency and are curious to both explore the world and themselves. This is typically true for elementals who are created by sorcery, as a new elemental is essentially like Mr. Meeseeks from Rick and Morty. They're helpful and know little of the world, so most of them want to serve their summoner while learning about the world. It often takes some time for the elemental to learn if their summoner is a shithead, so a good way to see if a summoner is a decent person or not is to check the physical and personal well-being health of any elementals they may have. Unlike Mr. Meeseeks, most of them don't have the desire to disappear after their completed assignment, though until they develop more of a sense of self, they often won't hesitate to fight to the death for their summoner masters. An elemental's overall power is also more static compared to that of the gods. A god's power level can fluctuate wildly depending on their job or cult in either direction. Since elementals do not have purviews to manage like gods, they typically don't need to worry about their power suddenly going away or bottoming out. Even if an elemental's native demesne, court, or home is destroyed, the elemental's capabilities will not be affected in the slightest. In fact, elementals grow slowly in strength over time, gaining more and more power until their original body turns into a long, serpentine dragon. This can be considered the final form of the elemental, known as the elemental dragon stage. This is a sporadic occurrence, as elementals need to be very powerful, constantly seeking out new forms of strength, and wait a long period of time before something happens. Your average elemental who pulls a 9-to-5 job every day won't likely ever reach this stage, as they never possess the drive to constantly seek out new and greater sources of strength. The ones that do push themselves could very well end up dying along the way. An elemental who reaches the elemental dragon stage gains an incredible boost of power. Just one of these things are easily able to stand up to all but the most skilled of Exalted heroes. Note that the standard elemental dragons are called lesser elemental dragons, in more exact terminology. But this is only because it merely takes them an hour to destroy a large city, compared to the multiple city destroying attacks that normal elemental dragons have. Thankfully, these are mercifully rare and only stay near the elemental poles. Since elementals are physical manifestations of the elements themselves, their bodies are naturally material. Unless there is a specific elemental, such as one made out of mist or air, elementals have physical bodies and cannot dematerialize. They may be able to do things such as melt into the earth or lava, but they usually can't dematerialize. One of the significant consequences of this is that an elemental's body is their actual real body, not a shell they can create. If this body is destroyed, then that elemental is dead for good. They possess no convenient method of resurrecting themselves after being cut into 1,000 pieces. Because of this, elementals are the type of spirit who would be most familiar with the plight of mortals outside of ghosts. The good news is that elementals possess the same agelessness as gods and other spirits, so they do not naturally die of old age. Elemental dragons also possess a limited form of shapeshifting that allows them to adopt a humanoid form, letting them more easily blend and interact with society. Or they can adopt a form similar to that of their original elemental shape. Lastly, I want to cover why I think of elementals as janitors or custodians of creation. Because of their own deep connection with the element and creation as a whole, many elementals have a vested interest in making sure creation's native directions work in the same way as they always have. Elementals can help out gods with maintaining creation, ensuring the plants are growing the way they should be growing without micromanaging every little detail. An elemental's powers may not be as unique, specialized, dedicated, or even powerful as the gods, but they can still do a thing or two. Both a fire elemental of lava and a volcano god could very well produce or manipulate lava, for example. Above all, they try to ensure the natural order of the elements in an area continues as normal. Dogs of the Earth, for example, are all about keeping nature in check. This does mean that, yes, farmers who try to expand too much or too fast could find their crops culled by the vicious creatures, or in the worst case, hunted down themselves. However, dogs of the Earth will also be one of the first creatures to reply if something disrupts the natural order. This means that if demons or fae are trying to set up the area by building brass spires or castles of dreams, then the dogs of the Earth will try to tear it down. Plus, dogs of the Earth aren't innately hostile. In fact, most farmers try to keep them as guards for their village or region by providing them tributes of food. It's a win-win situation for everyone. So we've covered two natural spirits of creation, so let's delve into the unnatural side. I took the liberty of using my Ouija board to advise my next pick, and it told me ghosts. and also drink red rum. So I'm just going to go with ghosts instead. Ghosts are a relatively broad type of spirit that are used to categorize those souls of the dead whom have yet to pass on in the world. Lingering physical and emotional attachments prevent the soul of a ghost from moving on, pursuing these things with a single-minded zeal. As death numbs the mind and senses, ghosts can be driven to greater upon greater extremes in order to feel the passions of life once more. Occasionally, some ghosts become mad with power or the whispered fragments of the Neverborn's eternal nightmares, warlords and champions of death who seek to bring all to the final inevitable conclusion of death. To explain a ghost's life cycle, we first need to delve into the metaphysics of the soul in creation. All living mortals in creation have a soul, and when you die, that soul leaves the dead body. What is supposed to happen is that the soul ascends through to Lith, the metaphysical platform where one's soul is cleansed of all impurities and memories, where after which each soul is sent down into newborn baby in creation, the cycle repeating all over again. Ghosts are formed when the soul doesn't go to Lith, either intentionally or unintentionally. If the soul has too many lingering regrets in life, then there's a good chance that it won't pass on into Lith, but rather head to the Underworld or back to creation to become some sort of ghost. This is why calling ghosts aberrations is true, because they go against the natural order of the world itself. So what, you may ask? Whose deal is it if the spirit decides to become a ghost instead of passing on through Lith? For one, this causes havoc within the natural order of creation. Ghosts are not part of the loom of fate, and when things that are not part of the loom of fate start to get involved with things in the loom of fate, then reality tends to break down in creation. If there are too many ghosts in an area that gather and use their powers, then that land could very well become closer and closer to the Underworld. The sun becomes dimmed, crops become harder to grow, and one day you may find all of your clothing swapped with neo-Gothic design variations. Don't worry, black looks good on you. All of this, of course, depends on whenever the ghost is the kind of ghost that retain their resemblance self, rather than becoming your generic zombie ghosts who want to devour human flesh. To understand the nature of ghosts in Exalted, one needs to first briefly understand the structure of the soul in Exalted itself. Yes, we're going full-blown Inception here now, so buckle up. Mortal souls in Exalted are split up into two different parts, the Hun side and the Po side. The Po side of the soul represents the basic and animalistic instincts of a person, while the Hun side represents rationality and knowledge. When one dies in Exalted and is slated to become a ghost, one of these souls typically falls off or dims as the ghost grows older. There's a small window of time after a ghost first becomes a ghost that they possess all their normal faculties as they did in life, but this honeymoon period does not last long. A soldier could find his Hun soul slowly slipping away as he becomes more and more like a hungry ghost. If you want a terrifying example of what this is like, search for the itchy, tasty Resident Evil to see the journal entry of a poor bastard as he becomes a zombie. Becoming a hungry or mindless ghost is likely a similar process, I'd imagine. Another take on it could be the witch from Left 4 Dead, a grieving, sobbing creature that's unable to do much of anything other than feel intense sorrow and cry, or intense rage as she hollows out your ribcage. If you're lucky, however, then the Po side of the soul quiets down instead. In this case, the ghost permanently keeps their knowledge and personality that the Hun side contained. This sounds like an amazing deal, keeping all of one's own knowledge and personality, with the upside of immortality and the downsides of never touching salt again and living in a fancy version of a ghostly Gotham City. But then things slowly start to change. Those little pleasures you had in life, that suddenly you no longer enjoy them on the same level that you once did. Soon it moves into some of the greater pleasures, before finally they barely bring you any comfort at all. The only reason you're doing these things is because of rote, because of routine. As a warrior, the careful dance of duels you had with lesser foes no longer stirs your soul as it did in life. Now you only crave glory in bigger and more grandiose battles. This doesn't have an official name in Exalted as far as I know, so I'm just going to call this sensation the Underworld Blues. Underworld Blues happens to ghosts precisely because of the Po part of their soul tapering off. That animalistic part of your soul did more than just make you crave food or sex. It was a thing that helped make you happy. If I had to use modern science as an example, it would be one of the chemicals in the brain that helps make one happy. I could see some similar analogs to depression here, mainly as I had severe depression once myself, but it is not quite like it. Unlike depression, I would see ghosts as a bit more motivated to seek out the things that they used to do and enjoy in order to help their boredom, but get more and more frustrated about this over time as they don't provide the same sort of reward or sensation. A ghostly grandparent may not be happy with the little or trivial things you do. Instead, they may try to push you to live a life so grand or dramatic that it could be watching like a soap opera for them. Ghostly plays are likewise overblown and exaggerated with extreme emotion in order to stir their undead hearts. Anything to capture the joy, sorrow, or other emotions they once felt when they were alive. The good news is that this doesn't continue indefinitely. Ghosts don't feel less and less until they eventually feel nothing at all. There is a cutoff point. When this cutoff point happens is entirely subjective. The Death Lord known as the Lover is a perfect case study for this. The Lover got so used to such extreme and esoteric forms of love and sex that such things have become routine for her. She still does it as that's what her character and personality is known for. That's what her rote is. But the act of sex in nearly any form is something that she no longer takes pleasure in. Granted, this is an extreme example, as the Lover has been a ghost who has had ready access for something she used to love doing in life for literal centuries. But if one could stir her undead heart once more, then that would be an exciting story arc, I'd imagine. Or an interesting one. And you know what the Chinese people say about living in interesting times. Now, if you're asking why ghosts do rote or routine tasks that no longer provide any sort of pleasure, enjoyment, or even purpose, then hold on to that question. We'll answer it later. And lastly, there exists the type of ghosts that defy common explanation or sanity as they engage in warped delusions or dreams of the neverborn. Such things may count as ghosts, but are a very different outside context sort of thing. Their internal soul structure and classification may be different, but they still fall under the general kingdom of ghosts, in that they exhibit many of the same traits as the rest of ghosts, despite how freaky or different they may be. So how does the process of becoming a ghost work? How do you become a smart, sexy ghost with the mind of an elder and a body of when you were in your prime, versus a ghost of decaying flesh and one eye missing? This is dependent on many factors. Yes, I'm using it a lot. The first and most important is plot convenience and the overall importance of the character. If the story wants the corrupt noble you killed to rise up as a ghost with their mind intact, then that's that. Outside of that, there are many other factors, such as strength of character, the intensity of regrets, and the splendor of the funeral. The strength of one's character means how strong one's ego is, what their willpower and determination are like. Jacob McFarmer is probably not going to retain much of his mind in the off chance that he becomes a ghost. He doesn't have high aspirations and principles, so unless he knows his wife and daughter are in danger, then chances are he won't become a ghost. For a warlord who was cut down in the prime of his youth, such a character likely possesses the mental fortitude and stubbornness needed to become a ghost. Again, there are many exceptions to this. For example, the Jacob McFarmer, there has probably been so many of them over the centuries of creation that, yes, a stable population of Jacob McFarmers appeared in the Underworld, because even 1 out of 100 for over thousands of years, that's still going to add up. Lingering regrets are perhaps one of the major reasons why people become ghosts. If a person has close attachments to either a person, place, thing, or any sort of unfinished business, then the chances of them yelling out to the heavens that they're not done yet and becoming a ghost will increase exponentially. This is why bitter enemies still give a respectful funeral for their rivals in creation, to stop the off chance of such bastards becoming ghosts and creating more significant problems. In Nexus, throwing dead bodies into the river is forbidden not because of pollution, but rather to stop those bodies from becoming hungry ghosts who then begin to eat the workers in the Firewander district. Stabbing a noble in his sleep to create an instant, painless death, it makes it a lot less likely for them to rise up to as a ghost, say to inflicting a mortal wound upon him in a duel, then letting the last images he sees in life being you absconding with his wife and child into the night with only a laugh. If a tribal warlord was cut down in the prime of his life in a fight with a rival tribe, then the chances are he could come back to try and lead or advise his tribe to victory once again, in order to seek out the destiny that he was denied in life. The splendor of one's funeral is the last major important factor I consider for people becoming ghosts. Basically, the more elaborate their funeral is, the better the chance a soul avoids becoming a ghost. If I had to use my own internal headcanon, that is, my own opinion, I would believe that this is a critically important step at boosting the ghost's ego before passing into the Underworld and becoming a ghost itself. Because of the wishes and beliefs of the people who once held that person close to their hearts, this belief serves as an additional layer of ego that helps the dead person not only become a ghost, but also become a ghost that's likely the person was once back in life. An old man who died and is only given basic customary funeral rites could come back as a ghost, but in their older state. An old man that was given an elaborate celebration of life that consisted of stories that are not only grand or heroic in nature, but more important things, and such as deeply personal stories, then that ghost could instead reincarnate in the Underworld, back in the prime of their life, ready to tackle the unlife in the form that his friends and loved ones most fondly remembered him as. If the funeral of Nasty McEvilbad consisted of a shallow grave, accompanied by pissing on his grave with a curse, then that ghost is more than likely going to come back as a monster of Nasty McEvilbad as he was in life, and likely without any higher thought processes other than basic human instincts, as the Poe side of the soul takes over. So after all these three things are met, all one has to do is spin the wheel to see if they come back as a ghost, or get yanked off the lift, kicking and screaming. Yup, it's that much of a crapshoot. Now, even if all three categories are passed with flying colors, then not becoming a ghost is like rolling a 1 on a 20-sided dice. Very rare, not uncommon, but shitty when it happens. This is why I said becoming a ghost itself is largely a plot device. Of course, if you want to make this chance 100%, then all you have to do is use necromancy. The only reason you won't come back as a ghost with necromancy is if your soul was utterly destroyed or already passed on to live. So don't delay. Contact your friendly neighborhood necromancer today. Side effects may or may not include permanent corruption of one's soul, night terrors, and occasionally whispers encouraging you to be the Neverborn. If problems persist, please see your local necromancer. Even after one ignores the initial pull of Lith as a ghost, the tug is always constant feeling for ghosts. So even after one becomes a ghost, how does one ignore the grand cosmic Ghostbusters soul trap and get on with their undead life? The answer to this is the ghost's own ties and connections to the world that anchor them to it. Such things are known as a ghost's fetters. Fetters are things that are connected to physical objects, including to, but not limited to, a ghost's own physical remains, people they have strong ties to, a cherished or valuable location, some sort of treasured item, or anything else a storyteller wants to pull out of his ass. There is an incredibly likely chance that a ghost has at least one of these fetters anchoring him to his death. And whenever a ghost manifests his form is destroyed, then that ghost will usually reform at the site of his stronger, intact fetter. Fetters are known to a ghost, but not always. Sometimes a ghost may have no idea why they become a ghost in the first place, and many of them could spend much of their undead lives trying to figure out just what exactly they need to do in order to experience the final release of death. A soldier could find his fetter to be at the site of an ancient temple, but has no memory of that place. Could it be the shock of his death causing him to forget? Or maybe some potent supernatural force tying up loose ends, making sure no one remembers what happened to such a place. Others may know their fetters exactly and take great pains in order to protect and hide them against their jealous undead rivals, or those meddlesome Puritan priests who exist in creation. One common fetter a ghost may have is worship. By getting recognition from people, a ghost's place in the underworld is more solidified and could even serve as its own unique form of fetter. This is one reason why ancestor ghosts cannot afford to piss off their still living relatives with too much drama, and why such ghosts could be motivated to help defend a village against barbarian attacks. If that village holds all your fetters, then yeah, you bet your ass you're going to protect it. Like other spirits, ghosts also become empowered by prayer and ritual worship. But one very common and useful traits ghosts have are the concept of grave goods. Grave goods are underworld copies of a good, and can possibly exist in upgraded forms, depending on its metaphorical significance. For example, if the son of a dead warrior carves and places a toy horse and his wooden sword for his father, then that toy horse could be brought to life as a mighty and faithful steed in the underworld itself, while the wooden sword could become a master-crafted blade. The ashes of one's most favored servant could summon an echo of the servant in their prime, which may be a full ghost bound to his ghostly master, or could be a robotic-like servant that could understand orders but lacks true free will. Even exalts who are laid to rest with their treasured artifacts will be able to wield several versions of them in the underworld. Now, are these spectral copies of the goods inferior to the originals? Nope. In most cases, they are every bit as equal as the original itself. If you kill the ghost of a Dynast who is a volcano cutter, then loot the same Dynast tomb for the actual volcano cutter, then you can dual summon volcanoes, which I think is extremely badass, even if volcano cutter itself is less than, okay, the current iteration of it is hot garbage. This may not apply to all artifacts, but some artifacts may have their themes ever so slightly shifted. Gnomon, being heavily about life in heaven in general, could be subtly shifted in the underworld, so its themes are about the calendar and unlife. In fact, grave goods are probably one of the major loopholes that could exist about each artifact being its own separate singular thing, unable to ever be replicated. But do grave goods have downsides? Yeah, a fairly major one. If a grave good is exposed to the light of creation's sun, then grave goods immediately vanish, dissolved by the light of the sun itself. Doing this is an excellent way of destroying valuable underworld goods and pissing off the ghost it belongs to. A lot of newbies to Exalted like to laugh at the hearthstone that shines with the light of the sun, only to realize it cuts out much of the bullshit in the underworld that's on the same tier as Isekai cheat abilities, which to say are utterly bullshit and devour plotlines alive. Note the anima banners of Solars are explicitly not sunlight. If you do bring back some 2nd edition charms, they can, but at least not innately in 3rd edition. Of course, this flaw is completely and utterly moot if the goods stay in the underworld. Remember, the bleak rays of the sun in the underworld are the last remaining bit of power that Ignis' soul can exert on the underworld, or pale imitation copy. The sunlight of the underworld doesn't dispel grave goods. But even with the risks involved with grave goods, there is still a thriving business around them. Why bother making masterwork crafted swords when one can get them from a ghost for cheaper? The sunlight in creation may be a problem, but this can be alleviated by simply wrapping a blanket around the grave good in question or using elsewhere storage charms. The only other flaw of a grave good is that it disappears if the tribute representing it is also destroyed, which makes it another reason ghosts have a very vested interest in protecting their final resting places. But back to the topic of fetters. What happens if a ghost has no more fetters remaining? In this case, Lith functions as the Ghostbuster trap it is, dragging the soul into the cycle of reincarnation with blissful release or kicking and screaming. It doesn't matter much either way to Lith. This is because the soul has nothing left to anchor itself with. And if it has no anchor, then the vacuum cleaner of the sky will suck you right up. Are there ways around this? Certainly. I'd be surprised if the Neverborn or the Direct Servants have some sort of mystical or esoteric way of stopping this. Probably something involving a lot of candles, ominous chanting, and blood. Can't forget the blood. Or lost souls who are forever doomed to roam the Underworld, having no semblance of their past lives and exist as only generic, faceless creatures. Or flaming skulls. Ghosts can always make more fetters, such as closely binding themselves with another tribe, but some fetters might be beyond the choice of a ghost and rather force upon them, such as their physical bodily remains. Since these fetters hold the very power of unlife and true death for the undead, they exert significant power over them. More than likely, a ghost will still have strong passions for their fetters, and will quickly seek to address any sort of danger to them, or aiding in their destruction if their fetter is related to hatred. Remember, some ghosts will happily go into reincarnation if the object of their ire is destroyed. If one possesses a fetter, then interesting options open up. If one makes a weapon from the ancient bones of a powerful Nephrak, then I guarantee you, one of those weapons' powers is going to be royally fuck up the owner of these bones as a free and permanent power, regardless of any other traits. At a minimum, I'd say the weapon applies aggravated damage against the owner, or if it's an artifact, allow the wielder to use resonant charms on that item against that specific target, or those serving under them, regardless of affinity. Alternatively, with a bit of sorcery, we can use the fetter as a compass, divining where the exact location of where its owner may be at any given point in time. The point is, for your megalomaniacal ghosts who want death of all things, having such a thing happen to you is extremely inconvenient. Another thing ghosts don't like? Change. A lot of them would prefer to live in the same era that they died in, and doing the same things they did in life. This is because of rote, which reinforces a sense of the ghost's own identity and personality, which if your lifespan is indefinite, then you can have a lot of change happen. This is done even if the ghost no longer gets any joy from activity, or even if it has little purpose. Ghost farmers in the Underworld are a perfect example of this. Growing something is a massive pain in the Underworld, while ghosts themselves don't even need to eat. In this case, ghost farmers continue farming because that's simply what they did in life. Likewise, many minor activities a ghost does seems to provide no joy for them could be explained because of rote. In terms of physical form, ghosts share the same freedom of materializing and dematerializing as gods themselves, or at least most do. A largely physical undead such as a Jiang Shi may only possess a physical form, but many other ghosts can dematerialize. When exposed to the light of creation's sun, however, many ghosts are forcefully dematerialized. This effect is so strong that even some of the Death Lords, the strongest canonical ghosts in the game, avoid sunlight for this reason. I'd imagine such creatures may be able to ward off the sun or have countermeasures for it, but cannot do so indefinitely. Holy shit! That was a lot more information on ghosts than I thought I'd have. Guess I might be taking a liking to the level spectral guys. Anyways, if ghosts are those things that are stereotypically dark and evil, then what's the next thing that is typically stereotypically associated with those themes? If you are thinking of your in-laws, then you are correct. But since your in-laws are forces only best understood by your significant other, we'll jump to the spot in third place, the demons. Demons are fragments of souls belonging to the Yozis, vast and mighty titans who were once the rulers of creation before being overthrown by gods. These titans are so mighty and vast that a single soul isn't enough to maintain themselves, so they make demons to maintain their power and personality, as each demon has a sliver of their mighty progenitor's strange alien logic and power, leading their personality as demons being warped by the standards of humans. These demons live their entire lives as slaves to both their higher souls and the chosen in creation, bound by powerful oaths of surrender agreed long ago. Occasionally, some of them break free from their prison, made from their emperor's own flesh, while others rule large swaths of hell and do whatever fancies their strange whims. If I had to describe demons in a nutshell, it would be strange. Unlike Fae, who are utterly alien, many demons can still be dealt with on a relatable level. It's only when you get to the level of the Yozis themselves, I feel that when most concepts and forms of understanding are thrown straight out the window. To repeat what I said before, demons in Exalted are not inherently evil, just different. It is completely possible to have an unbound demon be a lovely servant or even a romantic partner who shares genuine love with you in return. Just one that takes in the hair of others and makes them the dream catchers of ancient and cryptic sayings, which that you may not know the answer to. As one climbs higher and higher up the power and tier list for demons, such things become harder, if not for their strange behaviors, but their arrogant attitudes of being unquestioned rulers in hell. But it's still possible. Love conquers all, after all. But to understand demons fully, we first need to understand the soul structure of the demons and Yozis themselves. The Yozis in hell were once known as the Primordials, creators of the original world itself, shaping physical shapes or even concepts such as darkness and war out of the endlessly shifting chaos of the Wyld itself. It was the Primordials who made creation, gods and elementals, humanity, and other sentient races, and countless other creations. Long story short, the gods of creation didn't like the Primordials being the only ones who had access to the cosmic Xbox known as the Games of Divinity. I guess that total inflexibility of the Primordials has something to do with it too. So, as a result, the gods made the Exalted, declared war on the Primordials, and had all but 3 sign surrender oaths. When the Primordials who lost the war agreed to surrender oaths, they became beings known as the Yozis. Beings who had massive restrictions placed on their incredible cosmic powers, and shoved into itty-bitty tiny living spaces. Okay, technically a plot-related infinite living space, but I couldn't help but make the reference. One of the conditions for these surrender oaths were that the Yozis would agree to have all their souls within their structure serve as slaves for those who summon them outside of creation. So that demon summoning ritual in the book, that's technically just taking a demon slave for yourself. At the top of the demonic hierarchy, we have the Yozis themselves. As mentioned before, these are beings whose power is only rivaled by their strange behavior. Who can say what goes on in the mind of cosmic titans who existed before time itself, and whose intellect is so vast that it makes humanity seem like a goldfish in comparison? While their exact thought structure may be tricky to decipher, the general idea is that they still have human traits. They can get mad, fall in love, or anything else a human can do. They just might express those things in strange and unique ways related to their purviews. Yozis each have purviews like the gods themselves, only they have multiple purviews. Malfeas, for example, is the ruler of the Yozis themselves, having aspects related to the purviews of all about being a king, brass, and nuclear green suns. The aspect of a king can be broken down into a leader, knowing when to make wise choices in hard times, knowing when to show mercy, and knowing when to apply force needed to see his demands met. Oftentimes, these purviews collide to make some interesting behaviors on the Yozis themselves. In terms of interacting with the Yozis, you can go ahead and try. However, unless you've made a massive name for yourself, then most won't give you the time of day. Ignore the fact that you're exalted for a moment and realize that these guys have lived through countless eras, seeing all matters of villains and heroes across the ages. The Yozis see humanity as insects, and while enough wasps can kill a human, you're rarely impressed with a single wasp. If you have a name for yourself and are willing to do some favors, then maybe they'll listen. But I'll be very wary of whatever favors a Yozi may potentially ask for. Yozis either go big or go home. Don't ever assume anything is a tiny little favor. Unless you're talking to the Ebon Dragon. He always has tiny little favors you can do that which will in no way, shape, or form start a chain reaction to destabilize an entire region for his personal gain. Not at all. After this, a Yozi's soul is broken up into 3 main layers. The third circle souls, the second circle souls, and the first circle souls. Third circle souls are the strongest demons, then second, then first. It's important to note that there's a huge power gap between each of the soul tiers. If not in power, then definitely social status. The laws of Cecily make it very clear in Hell that you do not talk back to or question the commands of those stronger than you. And the words of those stronger than you are as good as law. If you're a first circle demon and a passing third circle demon tells you to fight that guy across the street to the death, you do it. You don't ask why, you just do it. Pleading might be narratively acceptable, but even that might be pushing it. The only time a demon of lower power or circle will be fighting against that of a higher circle is if a demon of equal or lesser circle commanded you to fight them. Outside of this social status, the levels of demons vary quite dramatically in power. A first circle demon is nothing more than a minion or mook of Hell, possibly powerful but can no way in heck match the power of Exalted unless they have numbers on their side. Second circle demons are a significant step up. These mighty demon princes of Hell able to fight toe to toe with beings as strong as directional war gods in creation and not be immediately plastered against the wall. Third circle demons are mighty beings whose arrival in creation sets off literal alarm bells in heaven and can quite easily warp the status quo of an entire direction in creation. Often a full circle of Exalted will be needed to deal with just one of them, or an Exalt who's really confident in their capabilities. No, I mean it. If your soul is a supernull and with a fighting ability, don't even think you can remotely hold a candle to a third circle demon until you reach SS3 at least. So, third circle demons. Third circle demons are direct and major manifestations of a particular aspect related to that single Yozi. As I mentioned previously, the Yozis are chufty beings to the point of where one soul isn't enough to encompass their entire being. In this case, various souls exist to help a Yozi express the totality of their might. Third circle demons answer only to the Yozis themselves in Hell and are otherwise called the Unquestionables. Part of this is because of power, but also because of their position within the soul structure. Third circle demons are some of the only creatures in the setting who can understand the strange logic of their patrons as direct representations of their soul. If I had to use a comparison, a third circle demon is like having a defining intimacy to a Yozi. It alters their behavior in major ways and is a major driving force towards every action they take. Since these third circle demons are major aspects of the Yozis themselves, they exert significant influence on the Yozi whenever they like it or not. In this sense, they're sentient defining principles. If you somehow convince a third circle demon to alter its behavior, then you could subtly change the behavior of a Yozi itself, or at least have a shot at doing so. If you decide to destroy the soul of a third circle demon, then that Yozi is going to undergo a dramatic shift in principles. A power vacuum will form as the remaining third circle demons will try to take not only a physical but political pull, trying to more deeply ingrain themselves to the favor of their master as they try taking the principal weight left behind by the dead third circle. All Yozis, however, have one third circle soul called the Fetish Soul. This Fetish Soul is the keystone of the Yozi, or at least the central aspect of what the Yozi defines itself as. If such a thing is permanently destroyed, then the entire keystone of what the Yozi is comes crumbling down violently. All of the third and second circle demons belonging to the Yozi violently implode along with their parent, their essence merging back as the Yozi reknits itself into a brand new Yozi. Many of the currently existing Yozis have had the misfortune of having this done to them, so if possible, they'd rather avoid this deeply unpleasant experience. The power of the third circles goes beyond merely potent. I wasn't kidding when I said these things could destabilize an entire direction of creation all by themselves. If a demon prince is something noble exalts are meant to face off in intense battles against, then third circle demons are the ones that force everyone in your group to bring out their A game. In terms of the canon enemies you're most likely to face categories, these guys would be below Deathlords or Ishvara, but they're still pretty close to it. What's even more fun is that you can get these guys in your payroll. binding one to your will with third circle demon summoning, which is perhaps one of the many reasons those who practice adamant tier sorcery are so feared. Try not to be so fearful of these things if they're players, however. You can still treat them like any other NPC. Talk with them, barter with them, seduce them, fight them. All of these are possible if you play your cards right. It's even more possible for high essence optimized characters to be able to go toe to toe against them. Just make sure that you have a solid plan B and maybe a lore or cult expert to dig up any particular behaviors of this demon before the meeting. And don't throw them against new players. New soulers may have supernal, but many players don't have the raw resources in moats to last a significant length of time against them. If you're a new storyteller, I'd recommend using these things as a plot device or big bad evil guys for your players to oppose. Second circle demons are next on the demonic power pyramid and play a similar role to third circle demons do for the Yozis. Just like the Yozis, each third circle demon has multiple souls it uses to represent itself and to force complexity. But unlike third circle demons, which a Yozi may have over a dozen, each third circle soul only has 7 souls. These are called the expressions of their soul. They usually have titles such as the Soul of Wrath or the Expressive Soul. Like their third circle counterparts, second circle demons have specific niches, narrower than those of the third circle, but still fairly broad. Most second circle demons are the trusted lieutenants of third circle demons. Each one of them has a vested interest in seeing their third circle master prosper, but rivalries between the souls are still likely to happen. Instead of emotional turmoil within a mortal soul, demonic turmoil between demonic souls could be vast wars with thousands of demons dying. And in fact is an excellent plot hook if you want to have 2 second circle souls of a third circle demon battling it out in order to win their master's favor inside a creation, and your task is to stop this war. In terms of power, second circle demons occupy a nice niche in Exalted as a whole. Most often they are used as benchmarks of power in between the tiers of competent NPC who I can only use one session and big bad evil guy who can oppose the entire party. Their charms are very powerful, but usually not game-breakingly so. They can be strange and alien, but entirely possible to find information on them somewhere. They're a solid choice for a player group's first major antagonist, something that seems overwhelmingly powerful at first, but able to be tackled once they get more power and experience under their belt. All before finding out that such a thing is only a pawn in some being's greater scheme. If new storytellers are using for comparisons of power for major antagonists, then second circle demons are an excellent benchmark. Even if your opponent isn't a demon, and something else such as an Immaculate Shikari unit, if the Shikari can do some damage to a second circle demon, while the demon itself quite possibly lands 1 or 2 solid hits, then that'd be a good match for most players. So in short, they are excellent for being the litmus test for testing the power of various things in the setting. Second circle demons have some influence over their third circle masters, but not as much as the Yozis themselves. It is true that if you destroy the soul of a second circle, it will have some effect on the Yozi, but it would be akin to losing a finger. But on a being with over a dozen hands, that might not amount to much good. However, if the third circle demon is the hand, then losing a finger would definitely have an effect. Killing or turning a second circle demon into an artifact may get you on a third circle's bad side, but it will show them that you mean business. The laws of hell are also in full effect here. Meaning if other third circle demons can command second circle demons as they see fit, with only the parent third circle or Yozi trumping such orders. Rules about power vacuums can apply, but they won't last for long. After a third circle gets over the shock of losing a second circle soul, they'll begin the process to make a new one, which can be as strange, as esoteric, or vanilla as you please. Yozis can decide to have over a dozen third circle souls, but third circles don't get a choice. They must have their 7 sub-souls. This doesn't have to be immediate. In fact, I think it makes narrative sense for a third circle to go on a quest of personal discovery and make a new second circle soul based on those lessons. But it has to be done eventually. The last is the first circle demons in Hell, the weakest demons that make up the greatest bulk of Hell. Unlike second or third circle souls, First Circle demons are more akin to elementals. They each have their own species in which many numbers inside of each exist, rather than the singular individuals of higher ranking cousins. First Circle demons may also be part of the soul structure of the Yozis, but are very distantly related to them. If Second Circle demons are the fingers of a Yozi, then First Circle demons would be the blood cells. You can slaughter tens of thousands of First Circle demons and it will have no effect on the parent Yozi themselves. Even the creation of demons themselves is completely up in the air. Some may reproduce whenever someone spits a curse into a puddle of vitriol. Others may reproduce chestburster style from aliens. Or if you're boring, you make them reproduce like humans. Being the common minions of hell, demons serve as loosely the mortals of hell. Everyday, average creatures who do their best to try to live out their lives, while occasionally doing odd behaviors and subject to the whims of their stronger overlords. I'd imagine that many demons like creation not because of escaping a jail cell, but because they're free from the whims and tyranny of those stronger than them. Are you a demon living in a town that's suddenly flattened by the great boar Isidore stepping on it? Your fault for being in the way. Are you living in a city when the Yozi Hagra decides to cause a rainstorm that incites rage in all around who make contact with the rain just because she hated the Game of Thrones finale? You should be thankful it was an acid instead. You got a date with a sexy demonette tonight? Not anymore. That Second Circle has just drafted you for the front line of a war in which he started over spat he had with his rival over which flavor tea is better. Not only that, you can't even get a good night's sleep because your neighbor constantly screams every damn day at the crack of dawn while stomach bugs constantly knock on your door begging for free booze. In creation, it is a relative paradise. Sure, if you're called in by a summoner, you might need to listen to their commands, but you have a hell of a lot more freedom and fewer annoyances to deal with than hell itself. Plus, it was in your agreed contract, so you might as well make the best of it. In terms of the exact numbers of demons that exist, is plot. The exact numbers of Third and Second Circle demons are easier to find out, as a Yozi can only have the high teens of a number of Third Circle souls, and each of those Third Circle souls having 7 Second Circle souls. First Circle demons, however, can vary roughly between the population of humanity to untold billions upon billions. Largely, this serves as a plot device for storytellers to adjust the population as they please. But unless players go to hell, their numbers are largely moot. Demons are heavily restricted to hell, and while breakouts may occur, some demons slipping through the cracks, as I mentioned earlier, it's still largely summoners who are the bottleneck for the demons themselves, which serves as a good segue into my next section, summoning. Demon summoning is a fun and favorite pastime across all editions of Exalted, an amazing and flexible tool that the demonic hordes of hell are forced to obey. When the surrender oaths of the Yozis were signed, they agreed to let the Exalted hosts summon and use their souls however they see fit. Now, unlike other settings, demon summoning in Exalted isn't a forbidden thing. Sure, others might give unknown summoners some leeway or strange looks, especially since a blood ape can appear out of thin air and rip out your spine at a snap of a finger, but it's not inherently evil because demons are not inherently evil. Demons don't innately make bonds with clever loopholes to escape them. In Exalted, demons are forced to undertake your rules to the letter and intent. This means that demons will undertake your orders to their best of the capability and their own personal knowledge. Note, their own personal knowledge. This is going to be very important whenever you summon demons, so it's very important to actually keep in mind what demonic behavior is like. Let's take an example of this. How about you summon some blood apes to carry a child from one city to the next? The blood apes will transport the child to the best of their ability and do whatever they can to ensure his safety. They won't willingly try to delay things because, oh, you didn't say a time. Nor will the child arrive without limbs because you didn't tell the blood apes bring him there in one piece. Those blood apes, however, do not make for good babysitters, because children blood apes don't exist. So these blood apes don't understand what this larval form of human is. They don't know why it's not as bright or as tall as other humans. They don't understand that they're causing untold trauma for this child when they tear apart a bandit limb from limb in front of him. They don't understand why the child ran away screaming from them and is now crying in a corner when they just merely offered him the first choice picks of the dead bandits. I mean, that's a fresh liver. You're gonna have to be nuts to turn that down. This isn't the demon circumventing the summoning requirements, but rather linked to the demon's own personality and individual knowledge. What a summoner could have done if they had the time is to summon a demon who was good with kids. That way, it would know exactly what to feed the child and what he should and shouldn't see, and arrive at a location with the child not only in one piece, but psychologically sound. It's like if you got asked by your boss to take care of his exotic pet, have no way to search for about it online. You have no idea what the hell it is, much less how to take care of it. So you do your best, and if they don't like it, oh well, you tried your best. Learn from it and move on. Each demon has particular behaviors that are part of their basic nature, ones which no orders are going to override. Some demons may prefer certain activities, such as blood apes enjoying tearing others limb from limb, but it's something they can avoid doing. Some don't have a choice, and telling them to stop is likely telling the grass to stop growing. A Tomescu, for example, is a sentient cloud of weapons that screams precisely at sunrise and sunset. Some demons may only speak in haiku, while others may need to constantly play an invisible harp with long multi-jointed fingers and die if they stop playing. So keep in mind, if you summon a demon that's a living tempest whose winds destroy all that they touch, you may want to have a plan to avoid being shredded to pieces the instant it's summoned. Of course, this is all dependent on whenever the binding itself was successful. See, if you read the spell for summoning demons, you notice there's a ritual for summoning, then one for binding. If you fail this binding roll and the roll needed to banish it, then the demon comes into creation completely unbound, meaning it can do whatever the hell it wants. At this point, the only way you can give such creatures orders is by using social influence in an attempt to barter with it, or have a friendly dawn cast nearby for an additional motivation. Most demons will want to be in creation, so if they believe they can't take you, then they're likely to cut a deal with you. Just be careful with this, as unlike bindings, demons are held only by word by this. They are free to find loopholes to abuse or even ignore terms of a deal altogether, just like any other normal person could do. In terms of spiritual metaphysics, demons are capable of dematerializing and rematerializing, just like gods. Demons who have a physical shell body destroyed will typically reappear at their summoner's side when fully healed. In Malfeas, I'd imagine it would be in a place of power, their home, or some other place of spiritual significance. Other than that, they only have a few differences from gods, biologically speaking. So now we've discussed demons, the strange boys of Exalted, in brief. Yes, that was the brief version. But there's a saying, there is always something else out there. Something stronger, something weaker, and in this case, something weirder. Well, make way, because if demons are the strange drunk town artists, then Raksha are the court jesters armed with knives. Now before I begin, and in case you forgot because this video is already long enough as it is, I know Raksha are not technically classified as spirits. However, the Fae themselves are major parts of the setting whose powers are strong enough for me to warrant talking about them in this fashion. Powers that not only rival spirits, but in many ways can serve as analogs to many of the other spirits within the setting. In a sense, many of their powers could accomplish the same end goal as other spirits can accomplish, but when you look under the hood, you see hundreds of tiny horses running in place instead of an actual engine. Their means are different, but they can accomplish the same end goal as other spirits can, and possibly more. Also, things are going to get very odd when I start describing the Raksha. So if you have a question in your mind, then hold off on it. Bite down your tongue until the end of this part, then you can start asking the questions. So what are the Raksha and Fae? The Fae is a collective term for a race of creatures that spawn from the infinite Wyld of creation, while Raksha are the nobility of said race. The Raksha and Fae's true forms, in this sense, are sentient masses of pure chaos, adopting a form to perform a role of their assigned tasks. turning back into chaos once more or into a different form once that task is finished. In creation, they function a bit differently, as their forms of pure chaos are akin to being a fish out of water when stepping in creation. To survive, the Fae use their chaos to weave more durable forms and narratives that can exist in creation, but at a cost. These forms are naught but dreams and metaphors, and if they perish, then the Raksha's own chaotic core will quickly wither and die. To sustain themselves, they need to consume both the dreams and souls of other people while inside of creation. A rough guideline of this is that Raksha lose 1 mote per day that they cannot regenerate until they've had a feed in creation. After all their motes are gone, then they start losing health levels, which they cannot regenerate until they start eating. Once all those health levels are gone, then they calcify and die. I could be a bit off on that, but I think it's a good ballpark estimate. Feel free to tailor that to your whims if you want to do something different. So before we continue on, let me help you suss out a few things about Raksha, as quite frankly, much of the literature in any edition can only be comprehended by art hipsters and those who analyze obtuse poetry for fun. If you want help to try to picture what a Raksha essentially is, think of a person making a character for an RPG and playing it out. This is literally the closest metaphor I can think of for Raksha. Their chaos core is what the player is, and the Raksha's solidified form, otherwise known as an assumption, is the player character. Most Raksha you'll meet in a game are interested in first and foremost in having a good time. Ideally, they want to win or be the victor of their stories, but they're interested in strong narrative stories first and foremost. So long as the story was enjoyable for them, then a Raksha will be happy when the story ends, even if they're actually pretty pissed off. If the story was garbage or they didn't do anything, then they'll be genuinely pissed. Not only because it makes their narrative and story weaker, but also because the story was shit. Do you get a Raksha who thinks a story is shit just because they lost? Yes, the same way we have such people in real life. But either way, think of Raksha as players, wanting to seek out strong stories and integrate themselves inside of them in order to bolster their own story, so that one day they may write a light novel to brag about to their friends about how cool they are. There, I just saved you several hundred pages of obtuse bullshit. If I had to pin down themes to describe the Fae themselves, it would be chaos, narrative, reality manipulation, and potential. Fae and the Raksha can be essentially almost anything. A Fae can appear as a noble human prince wrapped in the finest silks and gold cloth, or they can be a half-man, half-lion with the mane of a Fae. Or, most importantly, they can be an adorable cat-girl waifu, one of the other ways of accomplishing such a thing within the setting. They can be as tiny as a pixie or as tall as a castle, as beautiful as your most vivid dream or a literal waking nightmare. Using the chaos of the Wyld, they can essentially be anything they want, and with their powers of reality manipulation, Raksha can casually accomplish feats that would take even the most talented sorceress glow red with envy. So let's break down these themes a bit. Chaos would be the core component of the Fae in general. The Fae come from the infinite realm of chaos itself, thus they can be whatever they please. When a Fae adopts a form, this is called taking an assumption. In the Wyld, these can be made and discharged at a whim, but only a quitter or a sore loser would change their assumption in the middle of the story without a good reason. When Raksha enter creation, they lose the ability to change their assumed form. Like it or lump it, they're essentially stuck with it for the duration of their visit, or permanently if you're a daredevil. These assumptions impose narrative restrictions on the Raksha in exchange for helping them weave certain aspects within their story. These forms are incredibly potent. To give you an idea, humans start all their attributes at 1 and go to a max of 5. A Raksha starts all their attributes at 3 and go to a maximum of 8, essentially making them a race of try-hard Mary Sues because they must be better than you. This is one of the reasons why Raksha is regarded as waking nightmares to most peasants in the world. Even the weakest of Raksha are going to be on par with some of the most skilled mortals. Others are superhumanly beautiful, with tongues as sharp as razors. Well, their superhuman mental capacity means you're unlikely to ever outthink or outwit them. To hell with an anathema. If I'm a mortal living in creation, then it's going to be far more likely I'm going to meet a Raksha and their raiding party than you ever will an anathema. Add in the fact that Raksha weapons are likely to have artifact tier traits on top of their bloated attributes, and you'll quickly find out why Raksha are as regarded as the mortal busting machines that make even abyssals go cry in a corner with their gothic poetry. Before you hop on me, yes, spirits can also get bloated attributes, likewise, but not nearly as soon or as early as a Raksha. In fact, it's typically not for a damn long time. But mere superhuman attributes are not the only reason Raksha are regarded with terror. It's the reality manipulating powers that make them all the more feared. At first glance, the Raksha are like the Q from Star Trek. Beings who are seemingly omnipotent and can bend reality across their knee like a wet spaghetti noodle. An entire castle ground can literally appear overnight with a routine of knights and servants. An army can be made simply by throwing seeds at the ground that rapidly mature into anthropomorphic cactuses that beat the shit out of you. Or Raksha can use their incredibly potent, mind-altering powers that make people believe the castle is always in the city. When you look behind the curtain, however, things quickly become transparent. A lot of a Raksha's powers are shock and awe, and once you look at the man behind the curtain, then most Exalts should be able to stand up to them without many issues. Think of it like a JoJo anime. Your enemy is going to be strange and not known, but once you figure out how they work and the tricks behind their tactics, then the tables are turned. At this point, you're merely facing a superhumanly skilled opponent, which, even if you understand their magic, well, let's just say a bullet doesn't become less deadly because you know how it works. With the flexibility of Raksha magic, nearly anything can happen. Raksha can use their chaotic powers of magic and narrative to make almost whatever adjustments they want to a scene. They can do just like a harvest god could, and curse and blight an entire village, or make it have a bountiful harvest. But if you do accept Raksha aid, be sure to check and make sure your tomatoes haven't grown teeth and it tastes like human flesh. The very nature of Raksha powers is chaotic, almost like Sorcerer's workings in this sense. You'll get the general idea of what you want, but there might be some unexpected side effects. Not only that, but repeated Raksha magic in an area runs the risk of reality breaking down. The worst case is that the area of creation becomes a small pocket of the Wyld itself, but typically only major magical workings by the Raksha can put an entire area's reality at risk. If it makes sense, both a god and a Raksha can weave a sweater. While the Raksha will make a sweater, the threads will be a tangled, multicolored sweater. This is also compounded by a Raksha's body not needing to do many of the things a human body needs to do. Eat? A Raksha doesn't need to eat unless they want to. At least human food. Sleep? A Raksha doesn't need to sleep at all. It's only the narrative of their body that tells them that they must go into Odin's sleep. Bathroom? I think the Raksha are quite happy never needing to worry about that. Sexual activity? The Raksha can do that if they wish. And if you use the 2nd edition as a guideline, they have a 100% chance of becoming pregnant if either partner is immortal. Yeah, I don't get why either. Just keep in mind, if you Captain Kirk the Raksha, be sure to wrap your tool, or drink maiden tea, or ignore the 2nd edition-ism that they have there. In this sense, Raksha are like Terminators. They're going to keep coming at you until either you or them are dead. Alternatively, they can be one of your village's greatest benefactors, a sentinel that never needs to rest and will always keep a vigilant watch over your town, undistracted by the need of food or sleep. Only a puppet show of the Raksha's favorite soap opera can possibly distract them. One of the Raksha's own fortes is their mental manipulation powers, where even some of the weakest Raksha can make an Exalt stare in disbelief. A normal person convinces someone to get over their fears by instilling notions of bravery. A Raksha helps a person get over their fears by reaching into their souls, then using their powers to physically manifest those fears, then telling the person to go get them with a pat on the back. Or even just eat the entire reason of the fear as a snack, deleting the fear and the memory of it entirely and bypassing the need for such a task. This is all possible because of a Raksha's connection to chaos and, in a sense, dreams. I think the dreams of a mortal are the closest thing to a Raksha has to the pure, chaotic potential of the Wyld, thus why they can manipulate and devour such things with ease. Or maybe they just do this for shits and giggles. You never know with a Raksha. The Raksha perhaps have some of the most interesting metaphysics, not only when compared to spirits, but many other things in creation or Exalted as a whole. I'd compare them to old-fashioned vampires. They possess many powerful strengths, but also many crippling weaknesses. We've already discussed their supernatural bodies, their magical and illusionary powers, and the command over one's dreams and nightmares. But Wyld immunity is another persistent benefit the Fae enjoy as a whole. Normally when one enters the Wyld in Exalted without proper protection, one's body and mind slowly begin to mutate into something else. Raksha possess a complete and utter immunity to this. In a sense, I'd call this the Raksha's ego barrier, in where their own self-reassurance in their role prevents these external, physical, and mental changes upon them. If a chasm that contains a pit full of lava with sharks swimming inside the lava, then the Raksha can attempt to bypass the challenge with whatever narrative fits their story. Be it jumping on the heads of sharks as a cool, calm, collected badass, or a Raksha poet singing a song that domesticates one of the sharks so they may let her cross. Such a thing is only possible in the Wyld. Or if the same thing happened in creation, then both a Raksha and Exalt would need to make multiple extended rolls, and then you'd probably tell your storyteller to lay off the acid. Yes, I know this is confusing, but remember, the Wyld for Raksha is a place of myth first and foremost. Think of it in terms of theme. Is the lava shark chasm the ultimate destination for Raksha, or is it an obstacle on a path to some other greater destination? If it's the latter, then the Raksha only needs a single roll at most to bypass the obstacle. It could be something like rolling for difficult terrain for them. The same goes for defeating massive armies or sneaking through an entire castle. In a normal game, tasks such as these would be a complex series of rolls or subsystems. But for Raksha in a Wyld, such actions are only moves in a grand chess game, with back and forth attacks or singular obstacles being singular rolls. Creation itself is a harsh mistress, however, and will force Raksha to play on the same level playing field as any other being is expected to do. I'll discuss this more later. The only way a Raksha can be changed in the Wyld is at the hands of someone else, be it the hands of a stronger Raksha or something else. This makes Raksha really valuable if you want to tour the Wyld, as they know both the lay of the land and the safest path through it. While the Wyld may be strange and chaotic for most things in creation, it's completely normal for the Fae. Also, given the Wyld is an infinite expanse, having a guide to help you out there is never a bad thing. Now, when a Raksha creates an assumption for themselves, they need narrative weight to keep that assumption stable and intact. And to do this, Raksha create graces to go along with their assumptions. Graces are physical objects that are tied to the Raksha's most important principles and ideas. A Raksha who swears an oath of loyalty for his lord, for example, could show this by having runes of loyalty carved onto the head of his spear, while a charming socialite could have the fan that she's never without, representing her own social guile. In this sense, they're akin to a ghost's fetters. A Raksha without fetters will find his assumption quickly decay away as it no longer carries any narrative weight. And destroyed, then that aspect of the Raksha can be destroyed along with it. Now the bad part. We don't have any rules for graces at the time of this video, and we can't use 2nd edition rules to help with this, as the 3rd edition doesn't have the virtue system. In this case, I'd recommend tying the Raksha's graces to either the narrative weight or have them represented as virtues. In the case of the rune spear, such a thing could be the literal physical intimacy of loyalty to the Lord itself. If the Raksha loses his intimacy by social influence, then he could slam the spear into the ground, turning his back on his old master and the weapon as he walks away. If an immaculate monk shatters the weapon with magic, then the Raksha could very well have an existential crisis, asking if someone such as him is truly fit to fight in the name of his lord. The most important grace to a Raksha, however, is their heart grace, the single metaphor of the Raksha's current assumption that best describes them. The heart grace is the closest thing to a Raksha has to a vital organ, and is the most important thing to the Raksha. If one gains access to their heart grace, then they can effectively control that Raksha, as the threat of crushing it in your hand is a pretty good motivator. If you've ever seen the TV show Beasties or Beast Wars, when Megatron cut the heart out of a Predacon and placed it into a special container that causes immense pain for its owner whenever it was squeezed, owning a heart grace is like that. If a Raksha gives you their heart grace, then it is the sincerest form of surrender, love, or loyalty that a Raksha can make. If this heart grace is likewise altered or changed, then the literal form of the Raksha itself would change. Like the legend of Balder and Mistletoe, most Raksha keep their heart graces on them. Yes, it is dangerous if others get a hold of it, but at the same time, it is their heart and soul, their very being, and most would not be willing to part without it. Of course, some Raksha may try to seal it in a safe or some other puzzle involving a clever riddle. In this case, I don't imagine the Raksha traveling too far away from this area. And yes, this means that larceny characters are amazing against Raksha and can be used to strike the fear of God into them. Now, Raksha death also works differently, both in creation and in the wild. In the wild, when a Raksha's physical assumption dies, then it harmlessly melts away, leaving only the chaotic core behind. Unless a death was super dramatic, then most of the time the chaotic core will be just fine. After some time, it will make a brand new assumption to play in once again, just as a player makes a new character. These are the laws of the wild that the Raksha live by. But what happens when creation is involved? Well, in this case, when a Raksha dies in creation, or is even killed by the hand of someone from creation, even in the wild, then that Raksha is dead entirely, including its chaotic core. This is because the laws of creation trump the laws of the wild. And the laws of creation essentially say, when something dies, it stays dead. In this sense, many Raksha could have a respect for those living in creation, because those people play in the area on hardcore Iron Man mode, while the Raksha themselves play on video game journalist difficulty. This sort of extreme difficulty may not appeal to all Raksha, but as you know, there's always a crowd of people who are drawn towards the allure of difficulty and super high stakes. Wild Raksha may call Creation Raksha nuts, but the Creation Raksha wouldn't have it any other way. But aside from the ever-present danger of being slashed to ribbons, Raksha need to deal with the ever-present danger of calcification. Calcification is when the Raksha's own chaotic core becomes stagnant, their bodies rapidly turning into white dust or statues shortly after. This can happen in the wild, but is usually very rare, as chaos is always nearby. In creation, however, such a thing becomes a very real danger. Creation itself seeks stability, the very opposite of the wild itself. A Raksha making an assumption to enter creation is making a compromise, putting some static limitations on the potential of their chaotic forms to enter creation. But this is not enough. At every moment of the day, creation tries to impose stability on the Raksha themselves, to try and impose order on their chaotic core. To stop this from happening, Raksha periodically need to head back into the chaos of the wild, using the energies there to recharge the life support system on their assumption. Of course, creation is a very big place. A Raksha can use wild pockets that exist within creation to help out with this problem, but such places are few far in between, possibly guarded by jealous rivals or fearsome beasts. So there's always the easier way of refueling, using the local population. Raksha can consume the very dreams and soul of a person to sustain themselves. This consumption of one's soul is the closest thing that a Raksha has in need to acquiring actual food, and is a universal trait amongst the majority of the Raksha. Some Raksha are polite, either taking a recent dream or a bad memory as a snack. Others are not shy about squeezing the entire mortal dry, sucking all their memories and personality away to leave only a mindless husk remaining. Such poor souls are called the Dream-Eaten, and while such people are physically alive, they possess no agency of their own. They'll mindlessly follow any order given to them and are prime material for slaves. At this point, the person is effectively brain dead, ceasing to be that person altogether. The only way for them to ever have a personality again is with powerful magic to instill them with a brand new personality. Many Raksha enjoy this to the point where they are foodies. Some Raksha may try to instill the greatest love possible in a person before deciding to feast on their soul, while others may willingly play along with an escaping farm girl, letting her experience hope that she got away from the monster before surprising her and feasting on her in the same instant when her despair and shock are at their peak. There's also the matter of stagnation causing a Raksha to calcify. A Raksha's chaotic core is something that always desires to be moving, something that always desires something to be happening, shifting from one story to the next as a Wyld shifts from one form to the next. If they don't meet this criteria, then it's quite possible for a Raksha to literally die of boredom, even in the Wyld itself. Likewise, a Raksha that has no intimacies remaining, a being that cares of nothing and has no stake in the matter of the world, then their chaotic core will grow more and more stagnant and wither as a result. Now understand that such a thing takes time. I gave an example of how long earlier. A Raksha won't begin dying of boredom over a day, or even several weeks. Unlike starvation, this would take even more time, I'd imagine, possibly a season. This gives a Raksha the time it needs to find some sort of story to involve itself in, to try to help it recover. Of course, being creatures of narrative, it's possible for a powerful Raksha to come back even if they are calcified. If a powerful Raksha weaves a strong narrative that you strike him down, he'll return one day even more powerful than ever before, it could very well happen. This is the only way for Raksha to come back after having their assumptions destroyed in creation. It is rare, as only the stronger Raksha can pull this off. Things in the Essence 5 or higher range, I'd imagine. But it's still completely possible. When it comes to other oddities, promises are one of the more particular ones. Raksha cannot break promises they make lest they invite terrible misfortune, as if breaking an Eclipse class oath. The reasoning behind this isn't exactly clear, but if I had to make a wild guess, it would involve damaging the integrity of their assumption. While a Raksha will always make do on his promises, you need to be very careful about this. The Raksha follows the letter, not the intent of the oath or promise. You may be tempted to try and rules lawyer them, but I advise against this. Remember, Raksha want interesting stories, so if a promise seems so bland that would lead them to death, then they might try to aim for death instead. Better to burn brightly in your final months than to wither and slowly die. Instead, try to put in some deliberate or interesting clauses for both you and the Raksha to exploit when making such promises. If you need to wonder whenever or not a promise is a good one, then ask yourself this. If you were in the Raksha's shoes, would you enjoy playing out such a promise? Follow this, and you'll have happy Raksha instead of miserable ones. The last and most important weakness of the Fae, I'd say, is their severe reaction towards cold iron. Cold iron is iron that has never known the heat of a forge, and such things are a hard counter to the majority of the Fae. Cold iron burns the creature as if they were on fire and cuts through illusions and metaphors if they were not there. If a Raksha weaves and assumption says no blade can hurt this body as an aspect, then cold iron is likely going to be that exception. Understandably, Fae hate this material, and understandably, many mortal villages attempt to arm themselves with such weapons. If a militia has such weapons, then fending off Fae scouting parties isn't out of the question, while mortal champions have a tiny hope of winning against a Raksha. Powerful Raksha have different weaknesses than iron, if their own narrative is strong enough. For example, in my game that involved a Raksha court of Saturday morning cartoons, anything by children proved to be their bane. They could resist cold iron, but a child could literally outwit a skilled war master and slice them in half with a wooden sword in combat. Now, in terms of Raksha metaphysics, Raksha themselves are not spirits, so they don't possess many of the common traits or charms that other spirits have. Raksha cannot normally dematerialize, but they can explode into a burst of rose petals to become invisible, or step into a mirror and away from the world itself. A charm similar to Return Home could be learned if a Raksha has some important court or location he's sworn to protect. Principal motion is boring, but no one will bat an eyelash if you include it. And Measure the Wind could only exist if a Raksha possesses a treasure or a grace that allows them to see the truth of the world around them. In exchange, Raksha will gain more exotic and varied powers relating to this ability. For example, instead of Measure the Wind, perhaps maybe they can also see falsehoods or lies in one's words. Or maybe they can see through invisible walls. Now, like spirits, Raksha could gain power from worship, but while the means are different, the end is the same. Spirits gain collective power through a cult itself. Raksha themselves could gain power from a cult, but this is because of the narrative weight. More people worshipping them means that their own story is cooler, thus they grow stronger. Either way, the end result is the same. Both become stronger by the presence of cults. Holy shit! What a journey. I wasn't kidding when I said matters involving spirits are complicated in the world of Exalted. And now you have a straightforward primer of both religion and in the various forms of spirits that exist within creation. All this, however, was only a small example. The metaphysical rabbit hole is much deeper. I wouldn't say I only just scratched the surface, but I at least dug into the topsoil of such things. Next video, I'm going to be talking about charms. I'll go over what they are, how to plan out a charm, how to analyze and write one, before finally piecing it all together and how I consider what is a good charm. So stay tuned, and I'll see you next time.
Please, just give me anything. If I don't get her something, she'll put me in the doghouse.